E ka mana, e ka reo, e ka hau e whā, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Let me declare this meeting of the Community and Culture Committee on Tuesday, the 3rd of August 2021, open. Welcome to members of the public, particularly the youth, Dunedin Youth Council members and our aspiring leader delegates, staff, media and colleagues. Welcome to this meeting. And in so saying, I'd just like to acknowledge again the mana whenua of Tēnei Rohe, this place, the people of this place who hold mana whenua and in this district, Rohe, that we are so lucky to live, play, study and learn on. Kia ora. And work too. Right. I need to do housekeeping things before we get into the public forum. So the toilets of Wharepaku are through that door. Fire evacuation procedures, leave the building via the stairs and assemble in front of the Civic Centre. If you're not able to exit this way, then exit via the corridor behind the Edinburgh Room and through the Glenroy Auditorium to assemble on Harrop Street. If you're not able to exit via either of these routes, follow staff who will take everyone across the air bridge to the Civic Centre. Earthquake procedures, remain in the building, it's safer. Move away from windows and any equipment and furniture which may topple. Take shelter under solid furniture such as tables and hold on. In all cases, follow instructions given by fire wardens, civil defence officers, emergency services. Kia ora. I'd like to welcome to the table Isla Thomas, Duncan Campbell and Ben Somerville. Kia ora. These are aspiring leader delegates who are reporting back on their experiences at the Aspiring Leaders Forum. Welcome. So each of you has 5 minutes and then you maybe ask questions. Oh, are we asking questions all at the end? Okay, right. Kia ora. So,
hello. Tēnā koutou. My name is Isla Thomas. I have lived in Dunedin since I was 4 years old and graduated from the University of Otago last year with a Bachelor of Arts majoring in English. I have been an arts facilitator and poetry event manager in Dunedin since 2015. I'd like to start by thanking Mayor Hawkins, Councillor Gary, as well as Barb Long and Barbara Bridger from the Otago Community Trust for their combined efforts in sending me to the forum. I would also like to thank Gareth McMillan, Director of the Dunedin Fringe Arts Trust, for putting my name forward to the Council. The forum was resplendent. It felt like stepping into a different reality. People in suits and a banquet at every meal. Spending time in Parliament emphasised this. I was grateful to be glimpsing the parliamentary world, but felt disheartened that it so poorly represented the everyday reality of the country it governs. The leftist liberal arts bubble I had apparently been living in was definitely popped. Why are decisions made under King George's golden name and not on a marae? Government was not to be the focus of the forum, however. We were asked to turn our attention to faith and values. The forum had a much stronger Christian presence than I had anticipated, which narrowed the conception of what the term faith and values can mean. The fact that this Christian leaning wasn't advertised assumes Christianity to be the primary faith of New Zealand and one that deserves to lead us into the future. I find this problematic because though Christianity is full of good values and is largely well-meaning, it is an already over-dominant story in our collective consciousness and has caused harm to our communities. The forum did a wonderful job of observing tikanga, which was fantastic for me to witness, particularly coming from a Pākehā background and without great understanding of Māori or Pacifica communities. One night after dinner, I was lucky enough to find myself in conversation with Ben Somerville, who's just here, and Keith Robinson, who is from Kaitahu. We spoke for hours about Māori legends, tangata whenua, maramatanga, and honouring land. The two helped me to understand the ways my own spirituality is linked to the legends of this land and the many ways we belong to Aotearoa. I was particularly inspired by meeting and talking with Green MP Dr. Elizabeth Kirikiri, who made an effort to remember our names. Hearing her story and coming to understand what she values, how she carries herself, and how hard she works for what she believes in was extremely encouraging. She is someone who is already doing what I hope to. Head Commissioner of Police Andrew Costa spoke on his recently implemented harm prevention policy. The next week, I encountered a woman in Wellington after midnight who desperately needed help from the police. She had been beaten up by her husband. The woman's refuge and all night shelters were closed. The policeman I dealt with that night did not seem familiar with Costa's philosophy at all. This experience made me angry and eager to use my privilege to hold such institutions accountable and to create safe spaces for women in need. This will be a focus of mine moving forward. People kept saying the forum was life-changing. The 4 days haven't changed my life yet, but they have shifted my perspective. I met people who are full of hope and working hard to create a future worth living for. Meaningful conversation and quality connections were the biggest gifts the forum gave me. I was reminded of the importance of creating safe spaces where people can truly be themselves, connect and have open conversation. I will continue my efforts to create such spaces wherever I go, especially within Dunedin's creative communities. And once again, my gratitude is owed to the Dunedin City Council, the Otago Community Trust and the Dunedin Fringe Arts Trust for sending me to the forum. Thanks are also due to my parents and the streets of Dunedin for raising me, the University of Otago for my higher education, and Papatūānuku for nourishing us all so well through this life. Thank you.
Tēnā koe.
Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Duncan Campbell toku ingoa. I'm an ecology student at the University of Otago and an outreach coordinator for a non-profit marine conservation organisation that was founded here in Otepoti called Our Seas Our Future. First and foremost, I'd like to express my gratitude to the Dunedin City Council and the Otago Community Trust for giving me the opportunity to attend the Aspiring Leadership Forum. Ngā mihi nui. This forum based on faith and values gave me an opportunity to broaden my perspective on various issues that many suffer from here in Aotearoa, and gave me the opportunity to meet delegates such as Ben and Isla, who are some of the most incredible and motivated individuals I've ever met. One issue that I never truly understood until I attended this forum was the intergenerational trauma suffered by Māori. And although my whakapapa is rooted to foreign lands, talks from inspiring people such as Te Karere Scarborough, MP Dr. Elizabeth Kirikiri, and Pio Tere gave me an insight as to how a Māori worldview could be beneficial for solving major issues facing Aotearoa today and going forward. One such place I believe a Māori worldview needs to be used more is in the restoration of our whenua, awa, and moana, our land, rivers, and ocean, in the wake of human-induced environmental destruction. Over the next few years, I hope to use my leadership values I've obtained at Forum to work in the realm of marine conservation here in Aotearoa, and hopefully return to my homeland of Indonesia and other developing countries to improve outcomes for Indigenous communities. Working with an inspired outreach team here in Otepoti in Our Seas Our Future, I hope we can improve educate the wider public about major issues facing marine ecosystems, particularly by incorporating scientific knowledge as well as matauranga. As our generation tackles the climate crisis, we will continue to understand that environmental issues and social issues are not separate and that they are linked, strongly linked, that we are not separated from the ecosystem but a major component of it. One experience at Forum that really stuck with me was a volunteering day out in Porirua Harbour, where we did some coastal planting and weeding, and seeing the smiles on the faces of 150 other delegates covered in mud and restoring native coastal habitat brought me a lot of joy and motivates me to run similar events here in Dunedin. Once again, ngā mihi nui for allowing me to attend the Aspiring Leadership Forum, which has helped me understand the leadership values required to maximize the change I can make within this community. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa.
Tēnā koe, Mr. Campbell.
Kia ora koutou katoa. A massive thank you, first of all, to the Otago Council and also to the Otago Community Trust for sending me to the Aspiring Leaders Forum. and I hope that I'll be able to give back just as much to the community as you guys have given to me. Ko wairo te awa, ko kurahopo, te waka, ko rangatane o wairo te iwi, ko Ben Somerville toko ingoa. He aha te mea nui o te ao. He tangata, he tangata, he tangata. What is the most important thing? It is the people, it is the people, it is the people. This forum was a really wonderful chance for me to explore that and to explore the wide range of people and of rangatahi that we have around New Zealand, as well as an experience that enabled me to meet with people that I never would have been able to, and to hear from wonderful orators and wonderful speakers with amazing worldview. And in the end, the opportunity that I probably entered into it with a certain lack of understanding and quite amount of healthy skepticism about what the actual forum was going to mean to me. But once I got there, definitely found those walls had been eroded away very quickly as well. The night before the event, Duncan, Isla and I arrived in Wellington, never met each other before, thrown into random, trying to find each other around the airport. And that was a struggle within itself. And here we just started, we started the process of breaking down our own personal walls and of bringing each other in and understanding each other's experience. Jumped to the next morning, and I've put myself in a difficult position. The Beehive, it's a suit-only sort of area, and I managed to leave that hanging 800 kilometres down south, hanging in my closet. Luckily, a quick message to Duncan, he had a spare jacket, a quick trip down the road with the team, and I was looking, admittedly, my still permanently dishevelled self. So that was a lovely experience, and the kindness that was to come. Getting the chance to go to the Beehive, which is balanced and duality within Parliament, was very apparent to me. Both the massive, white rising walls, but also contrasting that with the lack of distinct representation and of understanding of tangata whenua within those walls as well, and the symbol of it as an oppressive colonial institution was something that hung with me as well. Being able to speak with people from across the political aisles was something that was also very awesome to me. I'm quite strongly into my politics and generally lean quite heavily towards one side of the equation. I'll leave you guys to figure out which side that is. But I heard from Dr. Elizabeth Kirikiri, and that was wonderful. But then I found myself locked in a room for an hour and a half with one of the more conservative MPs in our government, Simon O'Connor. And that was an interesting experience that I spent quite a lot of time going back and forth with him, talking through our worldview and trying to gain understanding of how we both reached where we were in terms of what our faith and what our values had led us to wildly different actions and thoughts around how the world should work and how we see Aotearoa, or in his words, New Zealand, moving forward into the future. Over the next couple of days, I was presented with the wonderful opportunity to hear from Te Karere Scarborough, who had gone on his own massive journey of rediscovery of his connection with his whenua and whakapapa as well, even changing his name and finding a new name. But here is also where the emotional height of the event for me occurred, where just after Te Karere Scarborough had spoken about Pākehā scientists in terms of the atomic bomb and how that had torn apart the fabric and the cloak of Io, and the one question that was asked to this Māori Marsden was, have they figured out how to put it back together yet? And I think that's a wonderful explanation of where our society has been and where it seems to be at quite often, is we have all of these technological advances, but emotionally, politically, we're still stunted in terms of the way that we look to put back together the diaspora of us as humans as well. And that was something that was held very close to me during that. And as we saw how the effects of colonisation had affected an attendee as she came up and stood up and presented her poem about the loss of heritage, the loss of the rightful anger that was held at the process of colonisation, and the hammer blows that has felt down through the generations, was something that was very key to me. But there was also the beauty of Aotearoa was shown, with people such as Isla and Duncan coming in with open minds and open hearts and enabling me to accelerate and expand my own journey and understanding of Matauranga Māori and of my own personal worldview. Engaging with young takatapoi and seeing their struggles and their triumphs was beautiful, and seeing their experiences as they have been both beaten down and built themselves back up, and the strength that I wish they never had to show, that they did show. And I believe that Utiputi could benefit greatly from having more of our rangatahi involved in events such as these, and having them involved in events that enable them to connect with a diverse range of people, bring their worldview, and to bring us to the Aotearoa that I know we can, and one that brings us pride and joy, and also personally develops all of us. Thank you. Kia ora koutou. Ngā mihi.
Tēnā koutou. Are you happy to take questions?
Yeah.
Right. Councillor Gary?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And first of all, I want to acknowledge the three of you. I've had the privilege of sitting on the panel to select, along with a representative of the Otago Community Trust, and I want to acknowledge Barbara Bridger in the room today. And we always want to send three. We usually have 2 slots, but we have made it work. And it would be my hope in the future that we may be able to make that work, because there's always 3 outstanding candidates. So I'm delighted to see you here today, and I happened to meet Ben the day after he got back, and he was fizzing. So I've got a question for each of you, and it's just a 1-sentence one. I know this is going to be challenging, but what would be your key learning for your future leadership journey from the Aspiring Leaders Forum?
For me, I think it's finding the understanding that spirituality and faith, though they are linked, are very different. Seeing myself as someone who had no religion, and I still don't have a religion per se, but the spirituality of my being has grown, and also just the beauty that you can find in people when people are willing to share themselves and you're willing to share yourself with them.
Thank you.
I think for me personally, the biggest thing I took away was being compassionate and being empathetic of one another. It doesn't matter about how different you are, your upbringings, your whakapapa. At the end of the day, it's about what it is to be human, and being human is caring for one another. And I found that, I was able to be humble, and from this forum, I was going to take that. Yeah.
Thank you.
It's a really difficult question. I think similarly to Ben and Duncan, so we spent a lot of time in small groups of 10 people. I was very quickly in my small group identified as the cynic. My critical thinking skills from uni are just above and beyond, apparently. And I think that came from a place of, because we were in this, very wealthy place with lots of power, I was kind of like, what are you guys doing wrong? What needs fixing? But I think by the end of the forum, I learned to let go of that cynicism and be more kind of open about where people with different viewpoints from me came from, without having to agree with them. But I think just making space.
Thank you very much. And you are aspiring leaders and inspiring leaders. Thank you.
Councillor Walker?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Isla, Duncan and Ben. I have to be honest, listening to you guys, if our future's in your hands, we're in a really good space, so thank you. And I don't know if you know, Duncan, I'm involved with the Wildlife Hospital, so thank you for your work with our Seize Our Future. My question is to you, Isla. I was just really interested in hearing about your experience with the woman in Wellington who got beaten up. Did you at any point feed that back to Andrew Costa? And if not, would you be interested in doing that? Because he's very keen to address these issues.
Cool. No, I haven't. I didn't sort of assume that he would have listening ears for me, despite having spoken with him in person. But I wasn't sure how to reach out to him beyond that. But I would be interested to, absolutely.
Yeah, feel free to get in touch with me after this. We'll sort it out. Okay.
Are there any other questions? Tēnā koutou, thank you so much for making the time and for your refreshing and inspirational comments. Kia ora. Kia kaha
Thank you
fō
to
mai.
all.
Okay, this brings us to item 2, apologies. An apology has been received from Councillor Christines. Are there any other apologies? Okay, I'll move that we accept the... Oh, sorry. I'll move that we accept the apologies. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Walker. I'll put it the motion. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Any abstentions? Thank you. The motion is carried. Item number 3, confirmation of the agenda. I'll move that the committee confirms the agenda without addition or alteration. Thank you, Councillor Gary. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Abstentions? Thank you. That is the motion carried. We're up to declarations of interest. Item number 4 on page 5 of the order paper. Does anyone have any new changes since yesterday, Councillor Wiley? All right, thank you. I'll move that the committee notes the elected members' interest register and confirms the proposed management plan for elected members' interests. Thank you for seconding, Councillor Walker. I'm going to put it. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Abstentions? Thank you. The motion is carried. Now we are on confirmation of the minutes. 5.1, Community and Culture Committee meeting of 15th of June. I'll move that the committee confirms the Community and Culture Committee meeting held on 15th, meeting minutes held on 15th of June 2021 as a correct record. Councillor Houlihan, thank you for seconding. All those in favour? Oh, is there anyone got anything to speak to regarding these minutes? Okay, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Abstentions? Thank you. The motion is carried. Item number 6, minutes of the subcommittee, minutes of the grant subcommittee for 5th of May. Going to move?
Madam Chair, I recommend that the committee, I move that the committee notes the minutes of the grant subcommittee meeting held on the 5th of May 2021.
Thank you. Councillor Walker has indicated he'll second that. Are there any speakers to this? Modi order. I'm going to put it. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Abstentions? Thank you. The motion is carried. We're on to item number 7, Toitu Otago Settlers Museum Board of the meeting of 22nd of February 2021. Do we have a mover? Okay. Councillor Houlihan moves and Councillor Elder seconds that the committee notes the minutes of the Toitu Otago Settlers Museum Board meeting held on the 22nd of February in 2021. Is there anyone to speak to this or? Okay. I'll put it. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Abstentions? Thank you. The motion is carried. Now we come to reports. Item number 8. Actions from resolutions of the Community and Culture Committee meetings. I'll move that the committee notes the open actions from resolutions of the Community and Culture Committee. Thank you, Councillor Houlihan. Who seconds? Is there any discussion? No? All right. I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Abstentions? The motion is carried. Thank you very much. Item number 9, the Community and Culture Committee Forward Work Programme. We're on page 53 of the order paper. I'm happy to move, and Councillor Houlihan will second, that the committee notes the Community and Culture Committee Forward Work Programme. Are there any questions? Yes, Councillor Barker.
I just have a question about on the first line it says about the activity report being presented, and it said it will incorporate an update from the Creative Dunedin Partnership as per the Arotoa strategy, and I can't see it in it. Did that report not make it to this session?
Through the chair, that report is due in December, towards the end of the year. Originally we thought it was due to this meeting, but that's an error. It should be towards the end of the calendar year. So that will be following at that point.
Are there any other questions? Okay, I'm going to put the motion. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Abstentions? Thank you, that is the motion carried. Item number 10, Dunedin Youth Council, 6-monthly report for the period 1st of January to 30th of June 2021. And we welcome Max Cunningham and Jess Christie, Dunedin Youth Council members, who will speak to the report. Tēnā kōrua, welcome. Are there any opening comments that you wish to preface your report with?
Kia ora. Thank you for having us here to report on this. I'm sure you've all read this. Is there any need for any summary? Yes. Just a brief overview of what we've done for the past 6 months. As a part of the DCC 10-year plan, there was an extensive survey with over 300 responses. We ran events during Pride, supported an event ran by Dunedin Pride during Pride Month. We have attended the Activate conference held by Youth Voice Canterbury earlier this year to give us more experience. Cheers.
We've also done lots of surveys about vaping for youth. We have a radio show on a fortnight Monday afternoon. We also help facilitate the Otipuri Youth Vision.
And just looking forward to the next half year, there's a lot of work that has happened for Plastic Free July, and there are plans for a Youth Arts Festival later this year. It promises to be busy, and we hope it will go well. Are there any questions about this report?
Thank you very much. Yes, Councillor Gary has a question, and then Councillor Walker, and then Councillor Elder, sorry.
Thank you for your report. It's very full. You've been very busy. I wondered, was that the first time that Youth Council representatives have been to that conference?
I believe it's not. I couldn't tell you when. I'd have to ask. But
so did you find it, what was the sort of key takeaway from that for you, for the two of you?
The key takeaway from the Activate conference, I think, was a network of support between youth councils throughout Te Waipounamu. Having links and knowledge shared between them makes it significantly easier for everyone to work together, because there is a significant amount of overlap between the work that is done. Otipuri is still very unique in how the youth council runs and the city, the environment that we found ourselves in, and so there are unique positions that we must take, but it has been helpful to connect with others.
And Jess, did you attend the conference, and what was your key takeaway?
I personally did not attend it, but from everyone else that did come back, when they came back they had lots of ideas because they bounced off other youth councils, so they got to have a idea weekend, and they just came back with lots of ideas, which was nice.
Thank you, Councillor Walker.
Yep, thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks, Max and Jess. Really readable report. I just have a couple of questions. In the looking forward, so we've had a date off, so you mentioned Plastic Free July. Now July's gone. What did you do for Plastic Free July?
A competition was run that was open to all students, school students, and that was through word of mouth and social media. And I believe it was done through Enviro schools as well, Enviro groups at school. Regrettably, it has not been the most successful, and I think that's possibly indicative of an area to work on for next year. Obviously, it's a repeating event, and I think there's still potential to work harder on that.
Great to hear. Look forward to next July. And just secondly, quite interested in your smoke and vape-free survey. When will that be completed?
So we're currently doing like a second round of surveying, and that one of the ideas another councillor's had was focusing more on mental health, like on our social medias. So somehow we want to tie in vaping with mental health, because from the survey we've had a lot of people say that like they do it from stress or like school and everything. So that will hopefully tie in if we touch on mental health, and hopefully just spreading the word of like educating people. We've been partnered with the Southern District Health Board and Smoke Free Aotearoa, and they've like helped like our journey of it all, so that was really good.
Thank you, Councillor Elder.
Thanks for coming, and thanks for the really good report. Christine actually asked most of the questions I wanted to ask, so that's really good. You've answered most of them. I just wanted to do an add-on to that. Was there one idea in particular from the conference that you guys want to maybe investigate as an outcome of going there?
I think it's difficult to narrow down just one, specifically because a lot of the ideas that were bounced were very internal based, and so it was a matter of more how can we improve it to make it more efficient and accessible to everyone else. And in this year's recruitment efforts, which have nearly started, there has been significant attention paid to how we can make it more accessible to a wider range of people. And so that, I think that would be the one key takeaway that we've taken from this Activate conference.
Thank you. Councillor Raddick.
No, it's okay. Right, I think you can hear me now, yes. Look, thanks, Max, and it's an excellent report. You guys are very industrious and undertaking a wide range of activity. I was curious at the statement that you made a bit earlier about being from the unique city of Ōtepoti. You have to have a unique point of view and a unique position on various topics. What did you mean by that? Can you elaborate on that, please?
So I think, at a face value, I think we can all appreciate that Ōtepoti is a very unique city in how it incorporates a lot of artistic endeavours. It has a very special character, and I think that makes it very different to, say, Christchurch or Ashford. But in regards specifically to Youth Council, I think there are differences in how long people can stay, and differences in the age. Most youth councils, it seems, throughout the country run from 14 to 25, and so they have a much greater range that they have to focus on. Whereas we have the luxury and the ability to focus specifically on high school students, which gives us, as it says, a fresh perspective, and a unique one at that.
And further to that, in terms of widening the range of reach into the community, you had the hui back in May. How many people attended the hui?
Around 60 leaders
Great.
from around the community.
And so what would be a target number? How many would you like to have attending the hui?
I would like to see as many as possible. I'm really not sure what the capacity for that would be. I think as part of the Ōtepoti Youth Vision hui, I think it's very much for community leaders or organisations who can do something for youth, rather than just for youth, and I think that is something else we'd like to work on further. But I think the Hui is not the place to be seeking to try and expand that reach.
Right, so, sorry, at the Hui, it was leaders, there was a Hui of leaders who can do things for youth rather than the youth. Great, thank you, that's excellent clarity.
I would also like to point that the Ōtepoti Youth Vision is not a Dunedin Youth Council initiative. We are signatories to it.
Councillor Houlihan.
Thank you. I know it seems to come up quite often, sadly, too often, the mental health issues for a lot of students. Is there anything you think, when I assume you talked about that, and it comes up in conversation quite a bit. Is there any ideas you've got for how you think we could maybe look at trying to help or improve this? And why do you think, two questions I suppose, why do you think there is so much, mental health issues for youth today? Do you think there's too much pressure on them? Or they'll probably say there is, but it is kind of...
I think absolutely there is too much pressure on youth, and I think there is absolutely too much pressure on the mental health system. It is not a confined issue by any means, and we have talked about how to work to this issue, to try and do our part to prevent some of this. And there are groups which we are working with on this. I think there is a mental health specific Hui later. I'm not sure on the time frame on that. We are working towards it, but I don't think this is something that can be just put on the Youth Council. I think this is more an issue with our health system rather than with youth services. I see a lot of academic pressure, I see a lot of social pressure. It's a very quickly changing world, as I'm sure you've all noticed. And I think that difficulty to adapt to changes at such an alarming rate can be a significant issue. And not just for youth, but also for the adults who those youth look up to. And I think if you ask a large group of youth, I think you will find that the adults they surround themselves with also play a very significant role in shaping their mental health, and that is something that needs to be fixed.
Thank you. Councillor O'Malley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Kia ora koroa. Thanks for coming in here today. And the question I have to ask you guys is, because you are, as you just said, you're mostly associated with high school students, and you'll have different pressures on you at different times of the year, and I imagine from now out to the end of the academic year, you've got all those external exams and stuff coming. And in the questionnaire that you asked of your members, you got a fair number of answers around the natural state of Dunedin, and I kind of remember you coming and presenting with that. What's a good time of the year for the DCC to interact with the Youth Council on things that are activities that we could actually work on with you? Is there a better time of the year than others, I guess, is the question.
I would say at the start of the year is when we do like most of our planning for like what we want to achieve or like what our main goals are. Like obviously we do have like new ideas constantly, but at the start of the year we kind of plan out how our year works. So if you want to like get in touch, I'd say at the start.
To add on that, I think the start of the year tends to be more community engagement based, and I think the end of the year tends to be much more event based.
If we were to do something along the lines of, say, zero waste or transport, to and from school and that sort of stuff, would it be coming at the start of the year to the council to identify people to engage with and see what we can do in 1 year, and probably with the idea that it would take maybe a couple of years to get it to knock out?
Yes. I think if that was to be done next year, for instance, I think talks would start at the end of this year, maybe December, leading into that transition period of new councillors doing the work in January.
The Reddick.
sorry, just a point of elaboration again, please, if you would. The natural state of Dunedin, you expressed some concerns about that. Can you elaborate slightly on that, please?
This comes from our 10-year plan submission. We asked questions based on what youth found significant in Dunedin, what was important to protect and what was important to change. And there were, across all 4 questions, some form of the natural state of Dunedin, the natural beauty or climate change was the number 1 answer. It was the most important issue to youth that we found.
Yes, so, I mean, obviously the issue of climate change, but was there anything specific about the natural state of Dunedin?
The very nature of our survey, of our 10-year plan submission, was that it was not overly specific. We found that the more specific you get when asking questions, the less engagement you have. And by keeping it deliberately broad, we were able to engage the most number of people to give a comprehensive submission, which can then be taken and narrowed down further in due course.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Are there any other questions? Councillor Gary has indicated a move to a willingness to move the report. Thank you, Your Worship.
I'd like to speak to it, Madam.
Yes.
Colleagues, first of all, thank you to the Youth Council representatives, Max and Jess, for coming along today. We've had a number of young people in here today, including Isla, Ben and Duncan. So I want to cover a number of matters around youth. First of all, how impressed with the way you have articulated your thoughts today, the reflective nature of those and the very considered, intelligent thoughts that are in behind it. Frankly, it gives me great hope for the future. And you won't be seeing yourselves around this table because we don't have young people of your age at the table. So that's why your role is so important. And when you come along, we listen because we need to understand what you're thinking, what your concerns are, what you need us to do. And I noticed that you touched on the change ahead. And certainly I have great hope in leadership, hearing from the 2 of you and the 3 of the aspiring leaders today. So thank you most sincerely for that. And I just wanted to digress a little with the indulgence of my colleagues to note, and I do take on board what you said about pressure and so forth, but I did want to acknowledge the head girl of one of your participating schools, Kavanagh College, Utapoti's very own Olympian, who has made us very proud in getting a personal best and being in the final of one of her events in this past week. And what an extraordinary achievement. So thank you.
Are there any other speakers? Your Worship.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Not quite. Tēnā koro. I just wanted to take the opportunity here to thank you for the work, for all of the work you've done, but in particular the work that you did in soliciting feedback from your peers through the 10-year plan process. I think it's a not insignificant achievement to get input from that many people, that many young people on a process as significant as that for the city over the coming 10-year period. And I think what it demonstrates to me is the value of using existing networks within the community to get a broader range of feedback than we would traditionally have received. I'd hate to gamble on how many of those 300 individuals would have participated had you not done the work that you had done to enable them to engage in a process that is somewhat alien to most of us. So thank you for that and for making sure that, and we could always build on these things and it's an iterative process, but thank you for making sure that your peer group had a place in the discussions that we had in May, deciding on the direction that Council was heading in over the next 10 years. Kia ora.
Any other speakers? Councillor O'Malley.
Madam Chair, thanks again for coming, and I really sort of, to follow up on His Worship's comments then, this whole relationship will have most value if you can see that the Council is in fact actively engaging with the with the stuff that you're doing, so that when you go out and submit to the 10-year plan and come back with observations, that we actually engage in particular activities that show that in fact we're taking that seriously, which is why I asked that question. And I hope that means that come December you'll get some, I'm sure you're already getting great contact from the council already, but come December there may be some very specific things come back your way that are in direct response to the 10-year plan submission. Thanks.
Councillor Elder.
And I'm very happy to say that the next item on our agenda actually has taken consideration for your views, and that's in the play spaces plan and the development of play spaces for older children and teenagers and high school children. So your input has made a difference and will continue to make a difference. So thanks for your input.
Thank you. Yes, and thank you both of you for speaking again. It's great to hear you. And what my personal view is, I would actually love to see a permanent position on council for a youth representative. We talk a lot about diversity, but diversity isn't only for Māori or Pacifica. It is in age and gender, and so I think, because there's a lot of decisions, while I like to think of myself as feeling young, but there are a lot of decisions we make around the table that do affect the youth of our city, and I'd love to have a permanent voice on this around the table that represented your voice. And it's great to hear you come in, every now and then to our meetings, but it would be always a reminder if we had someone there with a youth voice saying, oh, well, this is how it would affect us. And so maybe one day that might happen. I'd really like to see that. So thank you for coming today.
Any other speakers? Before I hand it back to the Deputy Mayor or Christine Gary, Councillor Gary, for her right of reply, I'd just like to take a personal opportunity to thank you both and your colleagues for all the work that you've done this year and that you will do in the future. I'd just like to acknowledge Ms. New as our staff member who supports you. And I'm sure, Jess, Ms. Christie, that you have a very proud dad, and I know it was intimidating for you to come here, but it's good that Mr. Christie took the time to introduce you, and you'll be back again, I'm sure, maybe around this table. So tēnā kōrua, thank you very much.
Just finally, obviously, your efforts are very appreciated and your presence here today is very appreciated. We look forward to seeing you again.
I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Against? Abstentions? The motion is carried. Thank you very much. Item number 11, Play Spaces Plan 2021. Welcome Mr. McLean and Ms. Swift. Would you like to make some opening comments?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to take the opportunity to acknowledge all of the input members of our community, different organisations had into shaping this Play Spaces plan, and in particular the well over 1,000 children that had input. And I'd also like to acknowledge staff and particularly Claire Swift in pulling all of this work together. Happy to take questions.
Councillor Houlihan.
Thank you. If I put my glasses on. It says on here that number 7 on page 60, that since the development of the Play Space Strategy 2006, trends of the provision of play have changed. What has changed around that, please? What's it? A desire for natural play, but what? How? So, are you saying in there that? Can you just expand on that a bit more? Like, what people want to, do they want to be? What were you noticing with that?
Excuse me.
When you say diversity of play, for example, like,
Yeah. So, sorry. So through the consultation and through talking to peers from other councils, there was a clear direction in the way that play was moving that the previous strategy hadn't covered. And some of the areas for that were around nature play and going back to your roots with the way that you used to play when you were younger. Mums and dads playing with their children, so providing play equipment that could support bigger bodies, grown-ups, basically. And there was the big rise in destination playgrounds, like Hamilton brought out a big destination plan where they had a vision of having 10 destination playgrounds in the city.
Oh, wow.
They've since reined that in. And yeah, so there was just a general mood in the way that we were moving with play, that a lot of the play equipment now is more popular to provide multi-use play, so children can play in a variety of ways on the same piece of equipment rather than on a swing or a slide where you might play in one particular way. You'll have a multi-use piece of equipment that enables you to be creative, socialise with friends, be active. There was quite a few different kind of themes that came up through discussions.
When you talk about, make a mud pie or whatever, as a kid when you used to play in the dirt or things like that. So is there going to be, do you see perhaps in the future maybe a bit of science-based sort of play areas or anything like that?
It depends really on what the community are asking for. So
Right.
if they're asking for that kind of thing, then yes, certainly we'll provide it. I mean, all play, any type of play is educational, regardless of, it doesn't need to be scientific. It's all about learning through play. So
From, like, I know for my kids, they go to the playground now and they'll be, it's a bit too babyish. Is there anything from sort of the 12 to 16-year-olds that we could bring in? I think that's the plan we're hoping to. What sort of things can we look at for that?
So certainly that was one of the things that we heard back from the children and from adults, was that there wasn't enough challenging play for the 10 to 14-year-olds.
It's true.
The type of play that you would be looking for that enables them to do more free play in terms of parkour, strength, ability, adventure courses, also anything to do with playing with balls, so soccer, basketball, riding scooters, skateboards, anything that's high adrenaline, like a flying fox. So all those types of examples are definitely, climbing was a big one as well, but climbing really high, slides that are really big and fast, so anything that gets the adrenaline going.
Are there any other questions? Councillor Wiley.
Thank you. What work have you done with the schools, especially the primary schools around the city? Because obviously they're investing in playgrounds in their own schoolyards.
So we don't directly approach schools to work with them, but we have, since going through the consultation plan, had principals contact us and ask us for advice, and we've been out to school grounds and provided them with some advice around what they can provide, but there's no jurisdiction from council perspective in terms of what schools provide.
So I know that Tainui School, for example, they've just added 2 slides to their playground, which actually fits with a lot of what I see in the narrative here. Do you think there's actually a better fit and a cross-relationship in seeing what the Ministry of Education and the schools are going to be investing in as well, in relation to especially like certain neighbourhoods and areas?
So the Ministry of Education, the way they provide the funding, they don't actually provide funding to schools for playgrounds. Schools generate the money for playgrounds through PTAs and festivals and those kind of things. Really we're there to help schools, and we can provide advice to them, and we're happy to work with them.
And then looking at this report, it really follows on after what's happened in the last 15 years. Is this like a bit of a blueprint of where we want to see our parks go over the next 15, 20, 30 years plus?
I'd certainly like to think so, but obviously it's an ongoing conversation that we'll continue to have with our community so that we can keep abreast of trends.
Okay. And do you believe that there, or see a rise in, school-aged children increasing through the city, and obviously wanting to utilise these facilities?
That's what I'm hoping.
Okay, because the only reason I ask that is because when we look at our planning and environment papers that are coming after this meeting, it talks about actually how there is really going to be no growth in children in our city and residences for our city, but yet I see here it seems to be very much about future-proofing our city for families and especially enhancing and investing in really good playground and recreational facilities. And so has the Parks team and the team that did this work, have they looked at what our planning team is and what our, I guess, the work being done around housing capacity have been putting together and talking about the second generation plan and the growth of the city?
I'll get that one. Through the chair, yeah, we have. We also have undertaken a playground provision assessment, so that's determined on the number of playgrounds per capita. So we know we have a lot of playgrounds, but the distribution of those playgrounds is not even. So yeah, but as the city grows, if the city grows, then our playground provision will change alongside it. So that's one of the metrics that we look at in terms of future planning.
Yeah, I guess just to expand on that a little bit, I'm looking again. You're talking about there's some good investment in parks and really creating, and again there's a talk about a destination playground and really investing some money in making these state-of-the-art playgrounds that really create dynamic play spaces. But and then when I look at the narrative, again with our planning environment papers and housing capacity assessment, and I look at from 2018 to 2038, we're looking at virtually no growth in one parent with children residents. We're looking at no real growth in couple with children. And I'm trying to correlate those two. And part of this is a really good paper, and I'm thinking we should be championing this as a great city for kids and families. And I think that's going to be a big part of it, but it doesn't correlate to what we're going to be looking at later.
If I may, through the chair, so the spend that we've got in the 10-year plan addresses what we already have, making it, improving it, and also adding new equipment to existing playgrounds. Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Raddick.
Thank you. And thank you for all the work that you've done on this. To me, this really thorough public engagement has opened or enabled you to identify a whole range of unmet needs in the play spaces area. And I think when we discussed this the other day, you identified a few of those, and a few of these are laid out here. It looks great. Could you perhaps just elaborate on a couple of those that you think are of greatest importance that we're going to be working on in the relatively near future?
We have got an implementation plan which covers certainly in some detail year one, but as Ms Swift has already mentioned, we'll continue to engage our communities in terms of understanding their priorities on a year-to-year basis and within the approved annual budgets. So,
Councillor Elder.
Hi, and thanks for your very thorough research and report, in particular looking at the 10 to 16-year-old, which is an area where people tend to fall off physical activity. I have a couple of questions, and I'm really interested in nature play and what that kind of means and what kind of things we need to do to encourage nature play. So that's my first question.
Nature Play is a focus on enabling children to get muddy, get dirty. It breaks down barriers between children with different abilities, because where one child might climb a tree, the other one might find it just really challenging getting in the ground and getting their hands dirty. It involves a much more sustainable approach to delivering playgrounds, so you'll see a lot more natural materials, planting, for example, sensory planting. We've just finished working with the Caversham Community Group on a sensory play facility there, which is a maze, and it's been decorated with planting to create the actual maze there. So anything that you would consider natural: water, sand, mud, trees, plants.
Oh, cool. My perception is that communities are embracing this and really welcoming this input into their communities. Can you talk about some of the partnership kind of things that could happen to actually make it even bigger and better? For example, Rotary clubs and stuff like that, and people fundraising to actually do a bigger contribution.
Yeah, thanks, and through the chair. So those are the partnerships that we will be looking to develop. I've had a conversation with one of the Rotary clubs, and we'll continue to engage. So I think that sort of underpins why we'll have an annual implementation plan, because it will give communities the opportunity to think about how they might want contribute, and we've had approaches before from communities wanting to raise their own money and contribute. So yeah, very open to that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Gary.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And yes, there are examples, aren't there, of communities partnering with council in the past to get really good play equipment. But I had a question that was a follow-on from Councillor Wiley, and you were talking, Ms Swift, around the school playgrounds. So in small communities where there isn't a council playground, the school playgrounds are really important. And it occurs to me that quite often they will apply to the community boards. Do you ever get called upon as a resource for those applications to advise? Because I'm wondering whether that even comes to your notice particularly. I'm certainly aware of approaches, of funding through that mechanism of the project fund through community boards.
Through the chair, I'm not aware of any direct approaches through that.
Because it's a wonderful resource we have in Ms Swift, so yeah, that might be useful to pursue.
Thank you. Councillor O'Malley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question's around destination playgrounds and the three that you've identified in the plan. That's Woodore, Marlow Park and Memorial Gardens in Moscow, is that it? How does, because this plan's fairly advanced now, there's a resolution that came through in the 10-year plan for a single destination car park. Well, that's Freudian.
It's catching, don't worry about it.
There's obviously a tension between the two outcomes though, so where do you think we'll be able to go with those two resolutions in terms of a single large one at the 10-year plan resolution and these three sitting like this?
Through the chair, so the playgrounds that we've got that are currently identified as destination, they meet the technical criteria. I think talking to a lot of people, their idea of a destination playground is Margaret Mahey, so a modern one, but the council resolution was to work up an options report. So one of the options might be a single playground. It might be spreading investment across existing playgrounds. So we'll do that piece of work and bring that back.
Thanks very much. And then the other question I have is, you talk about communicating with the community as you go through the design, and you've obviously given that Caversham example. I'm struck by an article I read about the school playground in Dunedin North Intermediate, where the board came back with a design for the playground and the children immediately rejected it, and then they co-designed the one they have now. So the mechanism for which you're working with the community, is that how that's going to work as you go into an area will go to a more defined backwards and forwards with the community as you get near the design phase?
Yeah, so the process that we've set up is there'll be a catchment area around each playground, and there'll be schools and kindergartens and local organisations and trusts and charities within those areas. So we will approach them to ask them what they're looking for. Recently we've done a similar activity with the Carisbrook School, where we're going to be upgrading some playgrounds in close proximity to the school, and we approached the principal and said, would the children like to be involved? So the children get involved in terms of identifying how they like to play, what their favourite pieces of play equipment are, what they would like to see, and then we use that to form the design brief that then goes to the designers to create some concepts based on available budgets, which then go back out to the community for them to vote on which is their preferred.
Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Tēnā kōrero, just picking up on the, we'll say, questions around partnerships and the potential for work to be done in collaboration with community groups or neighbourhood groups around doing things that aren't necessarily being designed and delivered by council. Just seeking reassurance that the ability of a neighbourhood or a community to contribute and collaborate with council on a project wouldn't necessarily mean that that work would be elevated in terms of the allocation of staff time or resources in delivering those projects.
Thanks, through the chair. It may be that if a community had the ability to raise a significant amount of funding, we would look at our work plan and priorities and look at where that particular playground fell. There may be room to move things around, if that answers your question.
I guess the risk is then that if enough neighbourhoods put themselves in that position, then they will become the priority neighbourhoods. And just following on from the mapping exercise we've done that predated this, that may be a perverse outcome in terms of addressing some of the things that identified.
Yeah, through the chair. So that's that's one of the risks we identified with working in tandem with the community. It may be, because it takes time to raise money, it may be if we were going to be going and doing some work, we would identify that, go ahead and do it, and the community can spend their time raising funds, and then when they're ready to add equipment or other bits and pieces, then we can work with them to make sure that that happens. So it won't stall our work program. Yeah, if that makes sense. Thanks.
Any other questions? Councillor?
I think just the clarity around that is that there are parts of the city where people do not have much money and they don't have much time, and there could be a negative relationship where, and we've seen that in the past, where basically people who have money and time can then go off and build their playground. So my question, I guess, is we would be making sure, and I think we are, aren't we, that those parts of the city where people don't have much money and time are in fact going to get good facilities.
Yeah, through the chair, yeah, absolutely. So we will have an annual work program where we'll engage each of those communities, but it'll be primarily our investment, and we would consider any suggestions from the community around their involvement. But yeah.
Any more questions? Colleagues, we have the resolution before us. Is there a mover? Councillor Elder, thank you. Seconder? Okay, would you like to speak to your motion?
Yes, just to say a huge thank you to Parks and Recreation and particularly Claire Swift for her very thorough analysis of Dunedin's playscape. And having children who now have little children, I know that this has been called for and asked for by many families and communities, and it's great to see this come to the council and budget being given to it. I went to a recreation seminar in which the 10 to 16 year olds were talked about, and 10 to 16 year olds are dropping out of formal play and sports at an alarming rate. And one of the big things they were saying was that that 10 to 16-year-old group need to be captured in our play spaces, and it's great to see that work done on that. I also love the work done around deprivation of playgrounds and the assessment of that, because in fact there needs to be equity when it comes to play spaces, particularly as they relate to place building, because young mums, young dads who are looking after children need to be able to go to their local playground and to have that well resourced. And so the analysis around play deprivation across Dunedin is really important when it comes to places where families can thrive, and places where families can hang out. And so that's really, really important when we think about place making. The other aspect also around place spaces, and I've forgotten, is that natural play, and I think that needs to take far greater precedence. And our play spaces need to be beautiful places, places where mums and dads, grandmas and granddads can sit and have a chat while Johnny plays, or places where grandma and granddad can play with Johnny. So they need to be places where they're created for gathering, for people to hang out. And so I think dovetailed with this, the toilets and the facilitation of more toilets across the city is really important in relation to that. I'm pleased to see that the disability community are mentioned in this, because in fact accessibility for all is really important. And also adults like to play. I certainly like a good swing. I don't like this twirly roundy things that make you dizzy, because they make me feel sick, but I think that the importance of adult play should not be underestimated, and I love seeing pictures of older people enjoying play spaces as well. So I really like this plan, because it's inclusive, because it looks at all the aspects, and I just think it's visionary and aspirational, and I believe Dunedin will be a great place to live, work and play in.
Councillor Houlihan.
Yes, I'd like to thank the Mayor for putting the motion for a proposal for a destination playground. I've wanted to do it for ages, but I thought everyone had said there's not enough money, but now the Mayor's done it. I'm fully supportive of it. I think it's a great idea. And I get numerous messages from mums who say, please suggest a destination playground. You know, there's a real need for it, quite frankly, without being rude to some of our parks, but Marlow Park is where we quite often go, but it's crap, really. I mean, it is, sorry, there's another, probably shouldn't use that word again. It's been used in here before. Excuse my language. It's not modern, it's not exciting, and there's only so many times that dinosaur slide can go. When you actually get up there, I got up there the other day, and it sounds terrible if I say I got stuck halfway, but it wasn't my size in my defence. It was that it wasn't that slippy, and it's lost its slip. So we have slides that aren't working properly, and the whale used to have, in my day, the whale used to have a spout that had water coming out of it and a bit of a pond around it. Now you can't even, there's no water or anything. So it would be good to have a lot of those things improved or demolished and rebuilt. But yeah, it does make a difference to our city, and as Councillor Elder said, that is part of a holistic thing with the city, is you want to be able to work and play in a city. And for our kids, it's really important is that they've got somewhere to play, because I know I get absolutely air-bashed. All I hear about is Minecraft. And my 10-year-old is, quite frankly, I think, addicted. But, if there's really good options for playgrounds, that's where I think we need to send the kids out to do more play, because most of them are sitting on their phones or their computers, and it's not good for them, and particularly not good for their eyes.
Councillor Lord.
Look, I'd just like to say we were asked today to adopt a new play spaces plan. It's updating a 16-year-old strategy, and I just want to commend the staff for the work that's been done, engaging with over 1,000 children and 900 completed surveys. And I just think if we're going to have good stuff in this community, we need to talk to the people that are going to use it, and that's what's been done. And thank you, Claire, and thank you, Scott.
Councillor Raddick.
Yes, I think it's been an excellent initiative, and there's lots of good information come out. And I'm particularly looking forward to upgrading and maintenance of the skate parks for that older demographic, and perhaps some addition of ancillary equipment in those areas. And also the development of a destination playground, and a great deal of the citizens identified Marlow Park as their preferred place.
Councillor Vandervis.
In my view, the real push or drive for a destination playground doesn't come from 10 to 16-year-olds, it comes from their parents. Destination playgrounds are, I think, designed, in this country at least, to be places where parents can feel comfortable, that they're tidy and that they've got various things that will keep their kids sort of exercised in a way that doesn't create any mess or any discomfort to the parents. If you look by contrast at the kind of playgrounds that you see in Europe and in the UK, and I contrast them because European ones are a bit different from the UK, the modern playgrounds there are more education grounds than playgrounds. They have tall climbing frames, which if you fall from, you will get painful education. These tall climbing frames invariably have pulleys and cranes on them so that you can actually understand how a pulley works and drag buckets of sand up to the top of these things and tip it on top of other kids. They've got running water in them, running through canals that have locks in them, and lumps of wood that you can approximate as boats so that you can learn about how water flows and how it can be used. The English have gone one step further in modern playgrounds, where they actually basically just dedicate a section of open ground with some water running through it, and often just a big pile of pellets and the necessities of creating fire, and just let the kids go crazy. They love these playgrounds. They are invariably a muddy, smouldering mess in which kids learn about fire, in which kids learn about how to get in and out of mud, to how to quench fire. And adults, quite frankly, don't really like these places. The kids absolutely adore them, and it's because they learn so much from them. So in terms of trying to go down the Margaret Mayhew, and remember the Christchurch City Council all told spent some $40 million getting there. Land and lots of other issues were involved. I think that what we really should be looking forward to is not your traditional playground where your Maori Hill mum will feel entirely comfortable and safe and be quite sure that their child will be exercised in a way that won't create any dirty clothes or any skinned knees. What we really need, and what the kids actually want, are real experiences. Something that they cannot get from their electronic play stations or whatever. Piles of pellets, a system available that they can actually set these things on fire. Some water running through the area with some buckets that they can make all kinds of mess with and learn about what really happens in the real world. This kind of playground, I think, is what will teach kids the most, will cost us the least, and will have the best educational benefits for the children using them, as well as being somewhere that kids will absolutely delight to go for. I speak from the personal experience of having lived on the outskirts of Balclutha as a child, and having the streams of the Pomahaka and various other places to go and play, where if my parents knew what we did, they would be absolutely horrified. They didn't realise that we took packets of matches away. They didn't realise that we actually built boats and floated all the way down to the Clutha in them. They didn't realise that we used to steal chicken netting and make eel traps, and that we got these things to work. They had no idea what we did, and that was part of the joy of it. The best education I ever had was certainly not in the playground, but in the wild areas where children's imagination and a few basic facilities allowed them to really learn about the real world. Thank you for indulging me.
That was interesting. God, I guess my jumping off the seesaws and stuff like that wasn't as adventurous. But no, I think I want to thank Mr. McLean and his team for putting together a very good presentation and document around the future of our play spaces. And again, it was very easy to read. It outlined all the key features, and it highlighted the engagement and what was needed around our community. And when I look back and see the importance around 86% want the DCC to fund more equipment for children with disabilities, 77% want the DCC to spend 77% want the DCC to spend more on play equipment for teenagers and adults. 84% want the DCC to invest in more in pump tracks, mountain bikes areas and parlour spaces. And 57% want the DCC to spend more on skate parks. When you look at that and then think of the Olympics, well, skateboarding is doing quite well as an Olympic sport. Pump tracks, well, that's a former start to the BMX, and that's been a big hit so far, and we didn't quite win a medal in that, but well, maybe next time. Parkour is a future Olympic sport, so when we look at actually tying in what this document shows us and really displays, is that we do have some great park facilities. We can do a lot more with them. And there's a lot of potential. When we then look at some of our parks, and it's been touched on about Marlow Park, well, that was led by the Dunedin South Rotary Club, which I'm former president of, and 51 years ago. And to think how little has actually been done to it in the last 51 years is actually quite sad. But it still has stood a test of time. There's been a lot of childhood memories. And Councillor Houlihan, yes, 51 years ago, I think you would have been a little bit smaller and the slide would have worked very well. So, but I think when we look at all this and we go, can we produce parks that are going to last 50 years and encourage kids for over 50 years? I think that's the key part that I see in this vision, and there's a lot of ability to make our city very family friendly and very desirable for the future.
Councillor Maui.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess my slide has lost its slip. It could be a metaphor for life. And Councillor Vandervis has given the students of O-Week a whole new defence now. So sorry, Your Worship, that was not a couch fire, that was European playground. The concept of play, I think, sometimes is ridiculed, and yet its importance in a city is enormous. And it's good to see this coming through, and all the amount of work that's gone into it. I think the team has come up with a really nuanced approach to our play spaces. If you look deep into the report, you'll see that there's accommodation for those small playgrounds in the community that are very important for parents with children under, well, basically children and toddlers and prams and stuff, that you need to have something close. when they get a bit bigger, they need something bigger and better, and we're recognising that play is something that everybody does, and therefore there's a greater need for older facilities for older children into adulthood as well. So I think all in all it's a great thing, and as Councillor Elder said, if you're investing in livability, then this is an important investment in livability in the city, and if you want people to come and live here and stay here, this is as important an investment as a stadium or an art gallery or botanic gardens. Thank you.
Your Worship.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chairman. I want to echo the thanks to Ms Swift and Mr McLean and their teams for what is a significant piece of work, even if, as we've heard today, all we need is a mud pit, a flamethrower and a trebuchet as a playgrounds network. About 10 years ago, Council was coming off the back of some significant capital projects, the Forsyth Bar Stadium as it is now known, but also the redevelopment of the Town Hall and the redesign and fit out of what is now known as Toitu, the Otago Settlers Museum. And as a result of those projects, in the years between then and now, things that we ordinarily would have invested in and should have been investing in, like our playground network, haven't. And we've done a fair bit of work in recent times making sure that the equipment that we do have isn't going to kill anyone, which is a bare minimum. But it's great to see the political support through the 10-year plan process for the budget that we now have to modernise, to augment, to grow the network of spaces that we have available for play in our community. It's incredibly important, as has been highlighted already, from a social wellbeing point of view, from a developmental point of view, even if our play spaces don't guarantee you the risk of third-degree burns, as they may do on the continent. I want to make make special note of and it's never the fastest way to go about doing these sorts of things, but the desire of staff to involve the people who are most affected by the decisions that we make in the decisions that we make, and that's not just children, although that was great, and I'd like to thank especially the schools who managed to find time in their schedule to allow us to engage with their students, but also more specifically the local skateboarding community. It's not a community that traditionally has garnered a lot of political support, and I'm not looking at anyone in particular around the table, but I think it was telling to me that we'd done condition assessments of our skate parks and they looked okay to us because we don't use them, and then we finally got around to asking people who use them, and it turns out they're very poor and are working with that community to address things on a priority basis in a way that works for them. And that is a significant shift, I think, in how we have previously planned the work that we do, and I think it's to be encouraged in this and in any other and in many other parts of the work that we do from an engagement point of view. I think building on the mapping work, which I think was very instructive for all of us in terms of seeing what it is that we have and what it is that we don't have across the city. I think having a plan for what we are trying to achieve, and then very concrete short-term actions around what we are planning to do and where across the city is a real success, really, in being able to communicate to our community what it is that we are doing and what we're planning on doing and why. And again, just wanted to commend the staff involved for the work that they have done on it, and look forward to seeing that work happen in the years ahead. Thanks.
Your right of reply? Okay, I'm going to put it. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Any abstentions? Thank you. The motion is carried. Thank you. Item number 12, update Mayor's Task Force for Housing Action Plan 2019 to 39. Page 64 of your order papers. Welcome to Ms. Brown and Ms. Nilsson, supported by Mr. West. Tēnā koutou, do you have anything to preface your...
I think all the councillors met Jill last week, so no introduction.
Questions?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted clarification on action number 2.5, which is about the Housing Navigator Facilitator. And I read the progress in the right-hand column, but I was a little confused because that wasn't what I understood we were going to do by appointing a Housing Navigator Facilitator to assist residential developers. I understand the Housing Plan Advisor's appointment, but I didn't see that as fitting with the original concept. But I'm sure someone will be able to clarify that for me.
So I think, Councillor, the appointment of Jill into the secondment from Kaingora is to look at a whole range of ways in which we can facilitate and support housing development across the city. So not just around community housing, but how we can actually assist developers to look at residential options and developments as
So
well.
I understood that. The bit I didn't understand was how we were meeting that desire to designate a Housing Navigator Facilitator, that specific action that we were going to undertake.
So I think it refers to the role in that was previously in CSA, in Customer Service Agency, around facilitation.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. And also item 1.4, would you be able to tell me the Cities for Adequate Housing? I wasn't familiar with that and just wondered if you could expand on that.
Kia ora. Thank you, Councillor. I'm new, so I didn't actually know much about the Cities for Adequate Housing, and we're still looking into that. There is a plan that my overall plan will come to you in November, so it will have updates.
So is that an international or national?
It is an international, and at this stage, there's 20 cities across the world that have joined it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Barker?
Thank you, Madam Chair. On page 65, paragraph 10, it says a housing coordination group meets regularly. Is it an internal DCC housing group? Oh, so it's not like with the external stakeholders, etc. Who's it made up of?
No, that's correct. It's an internal group.
Is that the group that's above, that's sort of city development, community development, etc.? Okay, thank you.
Councillor Elder?
Just in relation to that, is there a housing coordination group that, say, takes in Polytech Uni, property developers, that kind of thing, social housing developers? Like, it's a bigger group that looks at the bigger picture of...
So the answer to that is no, not at this stage that I'm aware of, but that will be considered as we develop Jill's role in the organisation to help us look wider than just within, look across the range of sectors to help us build a strong plan moving forward for housing.
So I just think of the hospital rebuild, and I should have included that in that group where we look at the bigger picture and people discuss things. Is that thought of? Is that being considered?
So that would be the aim, and I think I may be correct and stand be correct, but I think that was the intention of the Mayor's Task Force for Housing, to look at across the whole sector within the city to make sure that we're looking at all avenues to develop housing.
Thank you. And so is there a specific, I know this is an added question related to that, is there a specific property developers group or a group that speaks to builders, etc.?
There's not an initiative that council is initiating, but there is a number of housing groups that do come together across the housing spectrum itself, from the social end through to the property developers end.
Cool, thank you.
Your Worship.
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. It's just really a question of clarification, I suppose. The Mayor's Task Force for Housing doesn't exist. It was established for a discrete piece of work, which was producing the Housing Action Plan, which was then adopted by Council and became Council's Housing Action Plan. I wonder in the merits of continuing to call it that, and whether or not it is now indeed Council's work, and would that be an issue for staff?
No, and I think as Jill gets her feet under the table and starts to make those connections across the sector and build a conversation around how it develops, that may be the case, that it refines into something else that we would bring back to council if needed.
Yeah, I mean, I know it's by no means the most pressing concern, but I think there is still a misunderstanding that it is an active group, and if we can dispel that, that would probably be helpful. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Houlihan.
Thank you. It says in here around the hope to end homelessness, and I think that's a great goal to have. How realistic do you think that is, though, and how bad is our problem at the moment in Dunedin?
That's a hard one to answer. I mean, it's aspirational, and we should always be aspirational and work towards the betterment of our community. So if that's around reducing homelessness, that is the goal that we look to achieve.
Oh, I think it's a fantastic goal to have, and I hope we achieve it. But if we want to achieve a goal, you need to know what the target is that you're trying to, eliminate.
Yeah, and I think that will be some of the detailed work that Jill gets into as we move forward to look at how we measure our success and what does good look like, what's a good result.
Thank you. And I've got a question for Jill. Welcome. Thank you. And so can I ask, and you might not be able to answer this, but what do you see the scope of you being here? Because obviously you come from Kaingaora and you've got extensive experience here, which I think is great, so I'm delighted you're here. How do you see you being able to use your experience with that and bring it to council, and what do you see those benefits will be?
Thank you, and I feel very welcomed. I think one of the things that we've been looking at in my time at Kaingaora is how we look after everybody within our spaces. So the question about homelessness, that was also on the table for Kaingaora with the change of their legislation. Yes. I think for me it's about working as almost as an independent within council. That has been something that will allow me to work across groups and pull information together. Yeah. So the fact that I'm not an expert planner means that when I'm talking about planning, it will come from the planners. So it's about pulling bits together. That's what I see my role as.
Right. So I saw it mentioned in part of this is that, I don't know whether they're referring to your role with this, but that someone will liaise with, if I've read that correctly, private landlords as well. Do you see a little bit of it in helping them with residential development? Is that part of it?
I mean, it's yet to be determined, councillor, exactly what Jill will be doing. She'll be focused. She's finding the lie of the land right now, yes, and will come up to speed very quickly and start to develop a plan that will come to council at the next update of the plan. I mean, the reality is that to find success, it needs to be a broad church, and it needs to involve the wider community. Because as with any project, as we've just seen with the play spaces, the more minds and ideas you have to a project, the better solutions you get.
Yes, so do you see your role perhaps doing a bit more engagement with property owners, i.e. investors and developers? Is that perhaps part of it?
I see there being a significant amount of consultation.
Yes, because they're providing a service in the city that's housing that we need. So yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Okay, we are aware of the resolution before us. Do we have a mover and a seconder? Councillor Houlihan. Tēnā korua. Would you like to speak to your motion?
I'd like to say that I think it's great and quite a innovative initiative, and probably to give credit, well, there'll be a lot of people I suppose to give credit to, but possibly to our CEO for bringing in someone from Craiangora. It makes sense because quite often we sit around at this table and we say, oh, you know, it'd be good to have the ear of the government, but to have someone, so we sort of took it a step further and took the government and put them in our council and set, you know, which is, you know, it's great to have someone with that background and experience in here that can help with advice and knows the inside information. So I think that's a really beneficial step. And as I've mentioned numerous times, I hope that we can work more proactively with investors and developers to help get more housing in our city. Where, you know, in the next 10 years, we have already, not just Otipoti, but the whole of Aotearoa has a housing crisis right now. And I think, you know, for us to look actively at housing is certainly a positive step. And part of that will be having collaborative, positive relationships with landlords and developers. And so I hope we make it as easy as possible for people trying to develop or build houses rather than, you know, less red tape is good, and making it easier for them to do things that don't cost as much and get things done effectively. Thank you.
Councillor Gary?
Thank you, Madam Chair. That segues very nicely into what I wanted to say at this point. I wanted to acknowledge the Mayor's Task Force for Housing from the last triennium, and particularly Mayor Hawkins' chairing of that group on behalf of Mayor Kau. And it provided that cross-sector relationship building in the first instance, the long-term vision, and where we could make short and medium-term wins in this area, and that is the context from which we're now in a position to develop a plan for implementation of the Housing Action Plan. So I just wanted to note that for colleagues who weren't here in the last triennium, that is what has set the scene for where we're up to now, and it was really great to read the action list and the things we've managed to do and where we're up to with that long-term view. It's not something that's going to happen overnight, so full acknowledgement.
Are there any other speakers? I'm going to put it. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Any abstentions? Thank you very much. The motion is carried. 13, welcome Mr. Coffey and Mr. Snow. For item number 13, Community and Culture Activity Report for the quarter ending 30th of June 2021. Page 72 of our order papers. Welcome, gentlemen. Tēnā kōrua. Any comments to make?
No comments. Just happy to answer questions. Thank you.
Councillor Barker.
Just have a couple of questions. I'm curious. It was obviously a very good result from the Lanyuan Garden. The numbers doubling from last June. And was there an event on that made those double?
No event as such. I think if we remember back to June last year, if I remember correctly, we may have been in and out of level 2 around that time, which may have affected numbers. But other than that, I'm unaware of any other reasons why those numbers have doubled.
Yeah, I was comparing the numbers, the 2018-19 numbers, which is kind of a better base level, so I was very impressed. My other question is just around on page 80. I'm not quite sure who'll be able to answer this. Is the Dunedin Dream Brokerage and Boosted, and I wonder if we've got service level agreements with them, how they're funded and how they report, whether they have measures that they report against. Who's able to answer that?
Sorry, Councillor, we'll have to come back to you on that.
Are there any other questions? Oh, sorry. Yes, there are. Councillor Gary.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Page 82, item 58, the Village Ōtepoti. My understanding is that funding has in fact been awarded. Can you remind me of the quantum, what the amount was for the village? Ms. Wikaira?
I think it's about $20,000 seeding fund. Thank
Excellent, thank you.
Councillor Raddick.
Yes, I see there has been, following on from Councillor Barker's question, a bit of perhaps marketing and increase in numbers through Lanyuan and also Ulverston, which are the lowest, those two facilities are the lowest visited of our facilities. So what's been happening? I see there's an indication here, item 16 for Ulverston. Is that it? Or is, those two simple events enough to double the patronage? Or what else has been going on?
So my knowledge of Ulverston is limited. My time spent at Toitu Lanyuan and the Art Gallery. However, I do know they have been holding some really significant community events there as well, which has helped to bolster numbers with international borders obviously being closed. So.
Okay, so what is the ongoing plan to bolster the numbers further?
Yeah, I'm unsure of the ongoing plan myself personally. I'm sure that Janet at Ulverston will be able to help with that one also.
Okay. And anything for Lanyuan?
So upcoming, we've got the Moon Festival coming up, which is a significant event, and just there's always ongoing marketing around whatever we might be doing at any particular time.
Great, thank you.
Councillor, Mr. Raddick also has, Mr. Pickford also has information
I
too.
can just to add to Mr. Snow's comment about Ulverston. So there is a big focus on non-ticketed events to get through to increase that revenue, so the non-ticket revenue. So there's a big program of community events, as Mr. Snow mentioned, but also things like corporate dinners and so on. So all of those have helped Ulverston through that time during the COVID closure. So from a financial point of view, although it's impacted, it's significantly less than it would have been with just ticketed numbers being down.
Thank you. Councillor Walker.
Yep, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for the very detailed activity report. Just my question relates to number 23 and the updated events toolkit. It may just be my technical ineptitude, but I can't seem to find it.
It's not your technical ineptitude.
It's what?
It's not your technical ineptitude because it was mine was the same. It's still in draft form and it's at the final sign-off stage right now, and we would hope to have it up at the end of the week.
Thank you. Councillor Hall.
With the 3 spikes in the 3 years of the Lanyuan, would that not be the Chinese New Year?
So last year Chinese New Year was held in January. This year it was in February, so that's the spike in numbers there you'll see.
Yeah, that's a spike here.
Yeah.
Are there any other questions?
Just further on the other two larger facilities that also had an upsurge in April, May, June. I'm looking at the Art Gallery and the Toitu. So they both had an upsurge. Do you have any measurement whether that's locals going to visit or out of towners?
So we don't collect that data at those two institutions. What I can say is that looking at April in particular, it seemed to be a really prevalent time for travelling, New Zealanders travelling. We had Easter, we had Anzac weekend, and we had school holidays. So those numbers in particular were particularly strong in those areas. And saying that February numbers were down because I think people had probably travelled around Christmas time, etc. Kids had gone back to school, all of that sort of stuff. So certainly April in particular, we've seen really strong numbers in that period, and I think due to those factors.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Councillor Gary has indicated a willingness to move. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Elder. Would you like to speak to your motion?
Yes, I would. At local government conference recently, we heard of the importance nationwide of the creative sector in relation to the recovery in this global pandemic in these times. And we've seen that locally, and we see that through this report. And I'm delighted to see wins such as the City of Literature projects and the the money that has just been awarded to the village o Te we heard today from our young people from the Youth Council and how important the creative sector is in giving this city its unique character, and we heard at local government conference around the advocacy of former Mayor, the late Dave Cull, around this particular matter. I wanted to just focus today on one particular item that I had the privilege to attend, and that was item 63, which on reading it may just look like another book launch, but it was the book launch of a book called Prague in My Bones, written by Jindra Tichy. And Jindra was a professor at the University of Otago. She was a refugee from her native Czechoslovakia. She had lived and grown up through the German occupation and her life had been impacted by that post-World War II. By the occupation, she witnessed the invasion of Czechoslovakia, and she escaped the regime. And I think for me, and the reason I wanted to note it was it spoke, and she was there, of course, at the launch, spoke very much about the experience of refugees in our city from a particular standpoint, and I found it particularly moving. And it was a very rich City of Literature event, hugely supported by that team. And certainly gave pause for thought for our city as a city for refugee resettlement.
Are there any other speakers? Oh, well, you don't need a right of reply. Okay, I'm going to put it. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Abstentions? Thank you. The motion is carried. Item number 14. Summary of Advisory Group meetings, April to June 2021. Welcome back, Mr. Coffey. Any opening comments to make? Any questions?
No, thank you.
Councillor Lord.
Yeah, Paul, or Mr. Coffey, I'm just wondering if you can give a brief update just about the refugees that have come into the city, particularly the Syrians that have come in over the last 5 years, and how generally they are fitting in. Are they feeling okay about the place, or a mixed bag?
I think that's a very mixed bag. I think there are some refugees that have settled in extremely well. There are also some that are, still struggling. And there's been noted that some of the refugees that have been settled here have actually moved from the city, and there is anecdotal reports that some of them have gone to Auckland just due to a larger population base and different supports up there from their own community.
Yeah. Do you know how many have stayed? Like what percentage?
No, we couldn't, so I don't know that figure. Okay. When we've asked the Ministry of Ethnic Affairs, they can't provide it either.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Your Worship.
Yeah. Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a question around the process of bringing these reports to this committee and to this meeting. I'm just conscious of previously having been involved in particularly the refugee steering group, the sensitivity of some of the conversations that were had there, and I'm just making sure that the minutes that are then presented to this forum have been filtered through the various parties at that meeting to make sure that none of that sensitivity ends up in the public domain by accident.
Correct. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Gary.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This was around Immigration New Zealand, and around this council table we've talked at various times and approached MPs about a pop-up immigration office, and I was interested to read in the minutes various references to interactions with Immigration New Zealand, and I've certainly had feedback from those working with refugee groups around the difficulties. Do you have any further comments, or can you enlarge upon any of the minutes around this? Do you have a good relationship with Immigration New Zealand? Are you able to tease out the issues that occur?
we do have a good relationship with Immigration New Zealand, but they're not physically present in the city. They have adopted a process where they contract, and in this case in Dunedin it's the Citizens Advice Bureau, to do some of that face-to-face contact with immigrants. We wouldn't say that's totally satisfactory. It could be improved on, and obviously both us and the immigrants would like to see a proper presence here in the city that they get better access to.
So is that around the complexity of some of the issues that are being dealt with? That's certainly been the information that I've had, and I just want to check with you.
I think it is the complexity, but it's also, you know, we are talking about a form-filling process, and if, you know, English, you know, is your second, maybe fifth language, that is difficult, and it's that support that is, you know, the Citizen Advice are able to provide that, and they do a really good job, and people are happy with them, but it might be better if there was someone from that organisation assisting people as well.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? I'm happy to move. Okay, second. Thank you, Councillor Walker. I would just like to take the opportunity as a mover just to record my thanks to the staff for working and constantly. Part of the challenge of this work is relationships and acting with sensitivity and patience, and especially cross-culturally, and understanding that there are different, we cannot treat, just as we cannot treat any one group as a homogenous group with the same views and same opinions and same backgrounds, we cannot treat our former refugees that way. And there are a range of opinions and politics and what have you, and personalities. So not only that, but also for the disability action group, advisory group, sorry, and the social wellbeing advisory group working in that sphere. So just want to commend the staff and kia kaha, strength, all strength to you for that mahi. Thank you. Councillor Gary.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to note from my questions and how they were answered, to encourage colleagues that we continue to advocate for a pop-up immigration office in this city. It's been a call of this council for a number of years now, and certainly we need to continue that advocacy because it will make a real difference to many of the people interacting with Immigration New Zealand, but in particular our former refugees, for whom, as we've heard, the English language is sometimes their fifth language, not to even speak of the complexity of some of the issues and the difficulty of doing that by phone, and the need for support. So I would encourage colleagues in this council to continue that challenge and continue to strongly advocate for that pop-up immigration office.
Any other speakers? I'm going to put the motion. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Abstentions? Thank you. The motion is carried. Now we're up to number 15, items for consideration by the Chair. Are there any such items? Councillor Elder.
I was just following up on the Mayor's suggestion that it shouldn't be, that it should be called the Housing Action Plan rather than the Mayor's Task Force, and I'm just wanting to check with the Mayor on that.
We've already, the staff and have already taken note of that. Thank you very much.
Yep.
Any other items? Thank you. Well, I'd just like to pay tribute to those who have passed on, give thanks to those of us living. Apiti hono, tātai hono, rātou te hoka mate, kia rātou, tātou te hoka ora, kia tātou. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. The meeting is closed.
take advantage of the delicious silence to open the meeting. Kia ora tātou, greetings to everyone, and I will declare the meeting open. There is no public forum, and we have one apology from Councillor Staines. I'll move that we note that apology. That's seconded by Councillor Walker. Those in favour, please say aye. Against, no. That's agreed. And the confirmation of the agenda, I'll move that we confirm the agenda without alteration. Any discussion? Seconded by Councillor Hall. Those in favour, please say aye. Against, no. That's agreed. And in respect of the declarations of interest, you will have, eagle-eyed as you are, have noticed that an incorrect aged copy was appended to these minutes. I'll move that we note the declaration of interest that was included in the previous meeting, which is the accurate one. Are there any changes to that? There appear to be none. That's seconded by Councillor Lord. Those in favour, please say aye. Against, no. That's agreed. And I'll move further that the committee confirms the public part of the minutes of the Planning and Environment Committee of 15 June as a true record. Councillor Walker seconding. Discussion? Those in favour, please say aye. No, against, no. That is also agreed. Part A reports, item 6. Actions from the resolutions of the Planning and Environment Committee meetings. I'll move that we note the open and completed actions of planning meetings to the 3rd of August. I have a second to Councillor Houlihan. Any questions or comment? Appear to be none. Those in favour, please say aye. Against, no. That's agreed. Item 7, the Planning and Environment Forward Work Programme. Mr. West, do you want to make any comment about this before we take questions or some such? No. All right, I'll move that we note that report. Can I have a seconder, please? Councillor Houlihan was first with her hand up. Any discussion, questions? No. Those in favour, please say aye. Against, no. That's agreed. Item 9. That was item 8. Item 9. Did I jump one? Sorry. Item 8. Planning and Environment Committee Activity Report for the quarter ending 30 June. Mr. Henderson and Dr. Johnston. Welcome. Would you, either of you, like to make any comment to the papers? No. Nothing.
Thank you.
In which
No, happy to
case,
take questions.
Questions, councillors? Councillor Lord.
Yeah, I realise obviously with the date it's a reasonably recent report right to the end of June and we're only just at the start of July, but point 6, oh sorry, August, yeah, I was going to say the fact that you got the huge increase, 275 consents applied for in June, assumably to try and beat the development contributions. Do you know how July's gone? Is that?
Sorry, I have to pass that question to my colleague, Mr.
What I'm
Worthington.
trying to establish is it slipped back to a normal level. So it was in point 6, page 38. It says a one-off point of note for this quarter is the high number of applications received. The new development contribution, which started from the 1st of July, generated a significant number of applications, with 275 received, and I'm just wondering if we know, compared with the previous term of 88, I'm just wondering if that's taken a halt because everyone was rushing to get their consents in, their applications in.
There was a very short drop-off, but it has picked back up again.
But you don't anticipate will be anything like 275 again?
Not unless there's a huge increase to the DC policy. That was the trigger for that, where we added. Yeah. So no, I'm not anticipating that repeating for some time.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Further questions? Councillor Wiley.
Thank you. Looking at building consents and the volume, obviously there's quite a lot happening in that space. Mr. Henderson, are we still looking and using numbers that you've given me previously, looking around 55 to 58 days from the time a consent generally comes in to when it is completely finished.
I've not updated that information from previous, but that would seem about right. Yes, for a residential new build, yes.
Okay. And do we have enough capacity within the office, and or are we contracting out?
There's no contracting out at this point in time. The team are under pressure given the volumes, but we're still maintaining the 20 working days.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for raising that, Councillor. I omitted to compliment the staff on the performance, and the extra workload of late has been quite significant and is notable on the report, and I think you should be congratulated on managing it so well. Thank you, Paul. Councillor O'Malley.
Thank you, Chair. This is page 43, item 21, and table 8, which is the parking services number of infringements issued. And it's just unusually, what seems to be unusual is although it's up from the last quarter, that's because the previous year, because that was lockdown. And I'm looking at sort of the general trend. If you look at the 18-19 year, it looks like 16,500 were issued, and now there's more like 6,600 infringements being issued in that quarter. So are we seeing a general, people getting better, or do we not have as many officers out doing the enforcement?
It's primarily as a result of resourcing. We have 3 new starters that have started in the last few weeks, with a further new starter on Monday, and a further vacancy as well. The training takes about 6 to 8 weeks to get them operational. I think the July figure is about 2,500 infringements, but the expectation is that will continue to increase.
And then actually this sort of leads on to that. And in the rural areas, if there's an infringement, is there any intention of going out to those areas? We're having issues on the Waikato coast where people are asking about cars parking, on whether they are actually parking legally or not. How often or at all do we go out and check that?
I'd need to take that offline and check the data.
Thank you. Councillor Walker.
Yep, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the substantive and very interesting activity report. My question is around number 51, around the emissions data management system. Is there anyone here who can just maybe expand very briefly on what that is? No? Am I out of luck? Okay, cool. And second question, I think I know the answer to it, number 58, where you talk about the centre's prioritisation work programme. I presume that includes places like Port Chalmers. Would that be a good example of where that work would go on?
Yes, Port Chalmers Town Centre would be one of the areas.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Councillor Barker.
It's on the same topic as Councillor Walker, but I just wonder, I see that 3 potential partners have considered to join the Draft Carbon Zero Alliance. I see that the Southern District Health Board were down as one of the potential partners, and I wonder if there's an update on whether they're going to join.
Sorry, we don't have an update, but we are in correspondence with them. Once I've heard back from them, I'll let you know.
Thank you. Councillor Elder.
Thank you, Chair. I've got 2 questions, really. One is Eco-Design Advisor, and point 23, a key finding from recent low-carbon retrofit housing workshop was the need for collaboration. And in working in those communities that, we've got some quite substandard housing, and a lot of people still aren't uptaking some of the opportunities to put, insulation, etc. So what work were you thinking of doing in relation to the uptake and collaboration going forward to sort of get people on board?
That's a really difficult question, Councillor. The Eco-Design Advisor is working with the respective parties, but certainly the feedback that we've received is that even though there's opportunities to undertake the substantial alterations and changes, if you can only take the horse to the water,
Yeah.
Thank you. And your second question?
My second question was actually point 55, and it says other locations were being investigated for remaining parklets. And I was just wondering, I know that the South Dunedin Community Network and the South Dunedin Community Business Association are really keen for Lawn Street to be upgraded. Has there been any conversations around that with those groups?
Well, Lawrence Street would be part of the King Edward Street South Dunedin Centre, so that would fall into this item at number 58 around the centre's prioritisation program, noting that that area was the last major centre's upgrade in that program that had been done. It is another program of work that was paused for some number of years that we're just having the budgets returned to and looking at the priorities for kick-starting it again.
Oh, cool. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Ruddock.
Yes. Referring to item 13 and tables 2 and 3. At a previous meeting, we talked about, we asked for some information regarding requests for information, so RFIs. How is that work coming along?
I understand the reports are going to be reviewed in terms of the format, which has previously been alluded to, and yeah, we can change them as required.
Yes, because it's I mean, we've got phenomenal results in terms of getting them all processed within 20 days, but at the end of each month, the number does seem to be rising, the number of live consents. So we do hear from construction trades about requests for information holding, making things slower. So it'll be just good to see how that, what the actual data is on that. Thank you.
Noted. Yep.
Councillor Geary.
Mr Henderson, in previous reports we've talked about, and I've asked the question around the quality of applications, consent applications, and in relation to the time frame. Has that improved any?
Again, it's not something that we actively monitor. I've got no anecdotal evidence to suggest there's been any improvements at this stage.
I was just wondering whether it had anything to do with the Councillor Riddick asked the question about, the time frame and the request for information, further information, whether even anecdotally that is still an issue, and that we're not getting the full story around those, not from staff, but from the people complaining. Sometimes it's around the quality of applications.
Certainly the quality is an ongoing issue for us. Certainly from a building services team perspective, we're continuing on average to turn them around within 12, 13 days. Some are a little bit longer for residential new builds, around 15, 16, but so that figure remains fairly constant at this stage.
Councillor Houlihan.
On question 59 on page 48, where it says Gordon Road there, is that in reference to Gordon Road in Mosgiel?
That's correct.
Right, okay. Are you able to expand a little bit on what's proposed there? It just says currently being developed as to existing pocket parks. What can you just tell me what pocket parks are and how they relate to what's already there and why they needed? Thank you.
Okay, so there's, excuse me for not remembering the street names that they adjoin, but there's two essential pocket parks where a grid pattern street was dead-ended into Gordon Road. There's one next to the cafe, I think you're probably familiar with it, and there's another one sort of further up the road. So these are existing pocket park spaces that were created before my time. The furniture and the paving and the landscaping's looking fairly tired in these areas, so this is considered a minor amenity improvement, and it was essentially the community board asked for some works to be done, and we don't have a budget right now to do major upgrades, but these seem to be some nice little projects that there was support from the community board. They certainly were timely to renew, so Peter Christos has been working with the community board on progressing some refresh of those elements.
And will that add more parking, or that'll take it away, or how do the pockets work?
There's no parking.
Right.
They're paving, seating, and some landscaping. That they're existing pocket parks. They're not. It's just refreshing the furniture and the landscaping treatment in those spaces.
Oh, there's sort of like an open space pedestrian type area. Is that what you mean, that update those to make them look a bit fresher? Is that?
Yeah, they are. I'm not sure when they were put in, many years ago, and they are basically where the end of the street that would have gone into Gordon Road was stopped, and a little park was created.
Yes.
Yeah. You probably know. They probably look. 1980s, maybe they were created.
I know where this one cafe. Yeah. I've got another question around the, if that's okay, through the chair.
Please.
Yeah, thank you. Around the 2GP, does that come in this? We can cover that in this paper, can't we? Is that, or is it the next one? Would you rather this one, next one, this one?
I'm not sure until you ask the question. If it's about what work that we have done, or if then it would be in this report.
Okay. Well, it's a question really around, do we know any idea of figures for how many people are coming back to Dunedin because of the effects of COVID? Because they're saying that, what was I reading the other day, and it was quite huge, that where have we got here, that the migration of New Zealanders was provisionally estimated at 6,500, of which 2.6% is 169 people who may have returned to Dunedin. Do we, is that, like, so, because that obviously puts pressure on our housing that's already tight. Are we noticing anything like that?
Well, now that I understand the question, I think it's best asked of Nathan in the housing capacity report. But so if you don't mind re-asking that question when Nathan's here.
Thank you. Have an answer to that later. Councillor Barker.
Thank you, Chair. I just have a question around alcohol licensing. I have an 18-year-old now who's been out and told me what she observed, and I noticed around the renewal of the Vault 21 on licensing concern around the host responsibility, and I wonder how are the bars monitored for making sure that they're following all the policies that they should be? Does someone visit them?
Yep, so the bars are audited, and we do send an officer out. We've got a licensing officer, but I'll need to check the specifics of what that looks like in terms of how that works.
Do you mean the specifics as in they visit annually, or?
Yeah, frequency and I guess what they check.
Yeah, that'd be great to know, thank you.
And can I just exercise a word of caution? If you're going to name a particular premise, as you have done, it would be better to do that in confidence to a staff member if you've got a particular concern. That's fine. All right. No further questions. I'll move that we note the report. Can I have a seconder, please? Councillor Lofiso, any discussion? Councillor Geary.
I have a bit of a appreciation theme going on today, it seems, but I just wanted to note, Mr Chair, your work in terms of mediation for the second group of the 2GP, or the initial 2GP appeals, and the large amount of work associated with that, and the success of that process. So I think as councillors we should be very grateful for your experience and skills in regards to that, because I doubt that many of us, if any of us, could have carried that out in the way that you have.
Thank you, Councillor. That's very gracious of you. I would comment, though, that the amount of work that staff have turned over as a result of the multiple planning processes and the large number of appeals that have been satisfactorily resolved is to their credit. And I guess we'll talk about that more as part of the housing needs assessment when Mr Stocker is here. Any further discussion about noting the report? Those in favour, please say aye. Against, no. That's agreed. That takes us to item 9. Dr Johnson, you're back on stage. And just while you're coming up, Anna, can I thank you for a little reading that you've provided us. and compliment you on the comprehensive nature of a submission on a very complex piece of legislation with wide-ranging implications for this authority and others in the context of all the other matters that have been dropped on us in recent times. I think it's to your credit that this is coherent and legible and unsurprisingly aligns with wider submission for the other associated authorities. So you may want to make some introductory comments, or shall we just go straight to questions?
I'm happy to go straight to questions.
All right, questions, councillors. There must be material in here that someone wants to ask about. Councillor Barker.
I can see it's a huge amount of work, and I note that we put some money in the budget for 3.6 FTEs for 21-22 budget for additional resources to deliver on the increased workload associated with national policy statements. And when that budgeting was being done, did you foresee quite such an amount of work as this?
Well, we had the RM, the Resource Management Review panel's report, which was quite lengthy and comprehensive and had signalled a comprehensive reform. So we were expecting something of this scale, but the review process of the RM reform is running in parallel to a large program of national direction under the existing Resource Management Act. So we have the National Policy Statement for Urban Development that we are responding to. We have to respond to the National Policy Statement on freshwater via the ORC primarily and the work that they're doing, but there are a number of plan changes they're progressing that Council is involved with. And then we have a few more on the horizon that are signalled around Indigenous biodiversity and highly productive land. So there are two massive streams of work, one under the RMA and one in terms of this broader reform package that we are trying to balance in terms of staff time.
So what I would say, Councillor, through the Chair, is that we will resource appropriately for the work that is required and then look at how we manage staffing across the organisation. But we're aware organisationally and at a senior executive level of the importance of this work.
Thank you. I think my concern was the cost to local government of responding to a lot of this and the pressure that it's putting on staffing.
Yeah.
Thank you. Further questions? Councillor Raddick.
Yes, thank you for a very comprehensive submission, and I very much appreciate the specificity of the submission and the detail that you've gone to. I am just curious about one thing that affects a whole range of other things coming up. The reform programs are not so well integrated with Three Waters reform in the review into local government. Can you be a bit more specific about that? Or can you give us some examples that concern you about that as far as the planning side of things?
Well, I think this sector, the local government sector as a whole, is concerned with the order that these things are being dealt with, in that the proposed reform of the resource management system would be moving plan making to a regional approach, which obviously doesn't align with how it sits currently in terms of local government structure. So one of the comments that has come out of the sector is this the right order of things to be doing, and should it wait on the local government reform? So that is one question that some are asking.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
All right, thank Councillor O'Malley.
Sort of to follow up to that, it's point 7 and point 8 of the submissions where you we note that it's vital that the government engage with local government, and then we don't really feel that it has really satisfactorily at the moment. How much engagement has the government had directly with the DCC at the moment at this point?
Well, this is the engagement.
But this is the engagement.
This is it. So I think we had 4 weeks to consider this draft legislation, and that's been the extent of it, really.
During the drafting of the legislation, do you know what local government entities were engaged with? Presumably LGNZ, but
There has been sector level engagement, Councillor, but the specific engagement with the DCC has been limited to the 4 weeks that we have had to respond to this submission. But Taitura and LGNZ have been involved at a sector level, and there's certainly regional discussion, but it's a tight legislative timeframe for this government.
it is. Thanks.
Thank you. I'll put the motion, in fact I'll put all the motions. There are three on your order paper, approving the submission and authorising its presentation and so on. Is there any further discussion? I think the comprehensive nature of the, as I said earlier, of the submission speaks for itself. Councillor Geary.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I was reflecting on the similarity between this aspects of this and our conversation yesterday around Three Waters reform, and particularly the quote in the submission, and compliment staff on the thoroughness of the submission, the ability of local communities to influence and make decisions about the place they live, that local voice, the concern about the loss of local voice potentially. The other theme running through all of this is the speed at which it's happening, and the complexity with the various reforms, including local government reform and Three Waters and others. It's a heck of a lot in a short time.
Thank you. Councillor Houlihan. You're all fighting over seconding it.
Yeah, well...
That's fine. Well, I wrote you down. Do you want to speak? Sorry, he got in before you.
Yeah, I'll just be very brief, actually, and just sort of echoing the words of Councillor Geary. This is such a comprehensive submission that is of a highly professional level, and I'm just extremely grateful that we have the talent within this building to be able to produce such a stellar submission to the exposure draft. And I just want to thank all those people involved. I don't envy you. This is really high-level work, and I think really should be commended.
Thank you. Councillor Elder.
I just want to echo some of the concerns around the table. We've got the Three Waters reform, we've got natural built environment, we've got also locally DHBs being amalgamated, and I just think there's a lot of change happening, and it's happening really fast, and the loss of local influence over plan making is a concern on all those levels. And also, if we look at this amount of work, that's minuscule compared to the Three Waters work, and yet we're not, our staff capacity hasn't been bolstered by the government in any way, shape or form, or given any money to bolster that, to do this extreme amount of work. And I just want to express my concern about that, and just the amount of change and the speed of it. And I commend our staff on the work they've done, and I'm also really happy that we also worked across the region with our partners on this, so that we have a consistent message. But that loss of local influence is a concern, and also the fact that this is the first time we've seen this at the table, and we, it's a bit...
Thank you. Councillor O'Malley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Indeed, it is comprehensive, 57 points to it. And I want to just really point to the last four that we state back to the government, and that really is a roundabout engagement. People often talk about these things are going too fast or too slow or whatever. It's not so much the pace as it's whether or not you can see your own voice in the design, or whether or not, in fact, this is a implementation of a concept that has been thought out and is now being implemented, but consultation is really more one of informing rather than engaging. So I think as we go forward with this Three Waters reform, all the other reforms that are happening at the same time, people have talked about the order of events, they've talked about the magnitude of the change, and necessarily potentially also talking about the scale of the minimum unit. Currently our district plans and other such things are determined around the territorial area. If we now go to a regional, there's a rationale for doing that, but then again, the other side of that is that that area could in fact be much, much larger than our territorial area, and therefore we could have disjunction here. So there's a lot to be thought of as we go forward, and so I really think that the last 2 points that we look forward to working with the government and other people involved, and I'm very glad to see that we will be speaking on this.
Thank you. Councillor Houlihan.
Thank you. Yes, thank you for the opportunity to speak on this. It is massive, and I agree with everything Councillor Elder said, because such a big issue around changing the RMA. I know government has several governments have spoken about it. We knew there was going to be change coming, but it seems to now, once it's actually happening, has been, in my opinion, rushed, and at a time when there's a lot of other things happening. And is that fair and reasonable to do that to anyone, let alone local government, when as a council we have to deal with RMA issues all the time? And what's at hand here and at risk is, of course, the goals of it are to protect and restore the environment, better enable development with natural environmental limits, and give proper recognition to the principles Te Tiriti o Waitangi, and provide greater recognition of Māori. Now, so if we get this wrong, there's a lot at stake. And given, this is the first time we've seen all of this, it doesn't give us long to engage with our community, to talk about it, or to decide on such a huge, massive issue that affects all of us, and certainly councils, along with Three Waters, and along with the merging of the hospital that's happening. There's a whole lot of, everything seems to be happening all at once. It seems to be a rush and not a lot of engagement. So I think the government needs to, and I think we need to perhaps say that in a stronger voice to the government. You need to stop, give us time to breathe, and to take some of this in, and to bring our community with us, because I don't feel we're getting an opportunity to do that properly. Thank you.
Thank you. No other speakers. My right of reply will be brief, but I share those concerns that have been articulated. And it's interesting, isn't it, that we are now receiving communication from members of our community about their concerns about the public engagement on, in their case, the Three Waters reform, but they ain't seen nothing yet. And in respect of this document, this bill, and this submission, my greatest concern is in respect of what I don't think is going to be a logical or sensible alignment across a much wider area about aspirations of different communities. I think we've been fortunate that historically this city's planning has been conservative, but with vision around the shape of the city and where we should develop. I remain firm in the belief that we should be the community making those decisions, and I can't for the life of me see how our aspirations around a compact but large urban, complex urban space can align with most other areas in the wider region, and in terms of the collective work on the future development strategy. That may well be problematic, it may not, but I have a concern that I'm articulating and will continue to about that in the context of all the other proposals that we're having to deal with at the moment. That said, I'll put the motion approving the submission without amendment, authorising the Mayor or an appropriate delegate to speak to the Select Committee and supporting the Southern Council's joint submission. That was seconded by Councillor Walker. Those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against, no. Any abstentions? That then is unanimous. Thank you very much. That takes us to item 10. Mr. Stocker, come and place yourself with Dr. Johnson on the firing line, please. Welcome. Thank you for your report. It's largely self-explanatory, and it's not the first time we've seen this. And I have to say, I'm buoyed by the continued assessment that the work already undertaken or currently winding its way through the courts in whichever forum is getting us to the point we need to be. But clearly there will be some questions around whether or not we're going to deliver what's required of us. So, Dr. Johnson, do you want to make any comment first, or is it all Nathan's show?
I just clarify who's going to answer which questions might be helpful. So Nathan can speak to his capacity assessment work, which he undertook himself, so he's quite familiar with it. And if there's any questions around the response to growth in terms of our work program, I can take those questions.
All right. Questions? Councillor Geary.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a very small question on page 173, item 17, and it's the next steps. I have been asked this out in the community, and it mentions wastewater detention tanks. Detention or retention? Detention. Anyway, whatever. That they are being addressed, that are being used right now. How extensively, how widely are we using that as an option currently?
So Simon should have sat here. He would be excited about that question.
Chamber. Mr. Drew.
Oh, we could talk some engineering. So we're trying not to use them very much at the moment because we don't have agreements in place for who operates and maintains them, and ultimately a reticulated network is easier to maintain than a network of detention tanks scattered around the city. So we are looking at them to enable development of larger developments that are in transitional zone lands, but we're working through a policy of what that looks like, who operates and maintains, and how we decommission them in time.
Thank you.
Further questions, councillors? Councillor Wiley.
Thank you, through the chair, but bear with me, I've got quite a few. So, starting on page 176, it talks about growth in house values increasing 99.6% from 323,000 to 646,000 in the last 5 years. And everywhere we go, there's a housing crisis. Does this paper in front of us tackle our housing crisis, and does it tackle the issue we have with out of control price increases in housing?
It tackles a certain factor. So what we're trying to do with Variation 2 and with this report is that we're looking at the impact of planning on the availability of supply through capacity. All we can do in planning is to enable it to happen. There are many factors in terms of whether those do get built, like the construction industry, and then there's a lot of demand-side factors as well, driving price, like low inflation rate, which we can't control. So it tackles a certain bit, but we can't promise to bring down house prices with this alone.
So that then leads me into the details around migration. And I know 5 years ago it was not uncommon to have 800 odd houses on the market for sale, where barely there's 250 to 280 houses now on the market at any one time. So when I then look at this paper and I look at the potential numbers, I'm seeing a lot of areas that are out of whack in the sense of potential build versus the migration, especially in the next 5 years, but even going out to the beyond?
Yeah, it's tricky. What it's saying is that the demand is so high, and most of these demand is from pre-COVID estimates, that we'd need to build more houses than we've ever built before on record. We've been seeing a very large number of dwellings being consented through building consents, and we've seen a large number of subdivisions coming on stream, so that we're seeing people trying to open up land and to build houses, but it is a concern about whether they can be built fast enough to meet demand.
Okay, so when we then look at, on page 184, we have figure 3, new residential zone land in the 2GP, and that was what came out back in November 2018. Are we taking in that all the yellow and pink areas will be essentially developed on into the numbers of residential houses or units?
So what page were we looking at?
Page 184 of our papers. It is
I see.
page 10 of yours.
So that's where land is being rezoned. We're not assuming that all land that can be developed or which is zoned for development will be developed. Only a smaller degree of it will be economically feasible to develop, and only a smaller degree of that will actually be taken up. Some people will own the land within those coloured areas and have no intention of selling or developing. So there is some consideration of that.
Okay, so when I look at, and I'm trying to find the number here, that talked about development market, and I'm looking at tables on page 217 for us, page 43 for you, where it talks about sufficiency by area. So what I'm trying to get an understanding of is, are we including development on all those sites back on that figure 3 being coded as essentially developed sites come 2048?
So like I mentioned, there'll be some presumptions that they won't all be developed, but all of those areas which were shown as being rezoned in the 2GP will be in these figures or contributing to these figures.
Okay, so when I look at, and I'm not a member of St Clair Golf Club, so I can talk about this one. That is zoned in yellow on our figure 3 on page 184, and I think that was zoned for something like 670 sections. And again, that was released back in November the 7th, 2018, as per the ODT. And also there's up off Balmacuan Road, a segment of 4 golf holes at Balmacuan Golf Club, which I think was about 30 plus sections. So what I'm trying to get an understanding is those 700 sections or 700 house builds plus considered into the sufficiency by area, and when we talk inner suburbs.
Yeah, so the golf courses come up because on a map they do look like they're making a really big contribution. In the capacity model that's fed into this report, we've tweaked those areas to reflect the fact that we're not presuming that the entire golf courses will be cut up and subdivided and built on. The actual numbers of homes, as it's saying, might be built on those golf courses are very low. It's in the 10s or 20s, presuming that they might want to cut up a small degree of their land and subdivide off a small part of their land, not that there'll be any wholesale subdivision of those golf courses.
So we then, again, that then takes me back to the rest of the map and the graphics, and I'm trying to get an understanding of how we're actually putting the map out in relation to ability to build, because if you indicate to me the area the size of St Clair Golf Club, and that's only now going to be 10 to 20 sites, we're back on, again, I'm using the data that was presented through the ODT in 2018, where it talked about 670 homes. So I'm trying to get that clarity of narrative, because then it tells me with the rest of the numbers we get shown here.
Maybe if I have a try. So the area that you need to rezone to add capacity is significantly larger than the capacity figure that you're going for, because you have to discount how much development may actually occur. And that's particularly so if you're looking at not a greenfield site. So if you rezone a rural paddock, generally speaking, it will deliver a reasonably high yield because there aren't any other constraints there. But if you rezone an area for intensification or a site such as a golf course, you have to make careful assumptions about what you might get, and those figures can be quite low, even though the area is quite large. So you tend to zone a lot more than the numbers you need as if it were all to be redeveloped. So that's why it looks like a big area, but Nathan's assumption is you might only get 10 to 20 sites out of that area.
Okay, so I understand what you're saying. So I'm trying to get the clarity, because when you released the 2GP in November 2018, you made it clear that another 132 hectares available for up to 1,850 more homes to transition zones to be used when needed, including course to feed the Sinclair Golf Club site, 670 homes.
Yeah, I think that those numbers have been adjusted. The methodology that was used at the time of the 2GP to estimate yield out of rezoning is different to the methodology that Nathan uses now, which has now been set by the Ministry for the Environment. So it's his methodology is much improved over that which was used for the 2GP, and that is, in part due to his skills in the area, but also in part due to the more clear national direction around how that needs to be done.
Okay,
thank you. You've had half a dozen questions. We'll come back to you later if you've still got any. Mayor Hawkins.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chairman. A question for Dr. Johnson, I think, and it's about the housing preference survey work that is included as part of as part of this. And what influence that has in the work that the planning staff do in proposing either variations to the district plan or others subsequently, in terms of how the planning rules might enable a greater number of smaller units, for example, to respond to the latent demand that is demonstrated by the survey.
Well, I'll let Nathan, it is covered in his report in terms of how he looks at demand and then how we're fitting capacity into it. So I think maybe I'll let Nathan answer that, and if he hasn't quite covered it, ask me again.
Good. Thank you. So when we look at demand by a range of factors, and one is by housing type. So if we say we're going to grow by a certain amount of one-person households, kind of retirees, the housing preferences survey has been used to say that perhaps 60% of those would like to live in attached homes, townhouses and things like that. And that helps us come up with the numbers of how many townhouses we need to provide for. And that has fed into Variation 2 and the rest of the 2GP work, if that answers it.
How, I guess is my question, from a planning, what is the planning response to support the development of housing typologies that are in demand that may not currently exist?
Okay, so I suppose the initial response has been Variation 2. So Variation 2 has been a quick wins plan change to address what Nathan's reports have shown is our needs out to the medium growth time frame. So it takes into account what our projections are for household changes and what the preferences are for those households, as Nathan's just explained. So in terms of identifying how much further land we needed for intensification, or how much housing we needed to be delivered through intensification types, which included the family flats, included some rezoning areas where we've upzoned something from a general residential 1 to a general residential 2 zone, and some of the rule changes were to achieve the targets that were in Nathan's previous assessment. And likewise for the greenfield options that were in Variation 2. So the planning response is very much targeted around the monitoring and what it's showing we need as a city.
One more, if you'll indulge me. It's about things that are outside of our control. and I know from memory that, for example, the criteria in assessing whether a location is suitable for greater density depends on access to different travel modes, whether that's cycling or walking or public transport, for example. And I'm just wondering what, if any, conversations go on between our city development team from a planning perspective and the transport planners at the regional council are in charge of deciding where. I mean, there was an example where we rezoned or upzoned parts of City Rise, and then immediately that bus route was taken out of the regional public transport plan, and that's that's an obvious example, but there are smaller things that could be done to better align those two things, those two processes that go on in two very different buildings.
Yeah, well, I guess that leads us on to the work that we are just starting, which is the future development strategy. And the purpose of that work is exactly that. It's to integrate land use planning with infrastructure delivery and services delivery, so including public transport. So that's a joint process that we need to run with the ORC, and is a really positive initiative in terms of improving the way we integrate those functions. So yes, we do currently talk to them, but we don't have a joint strategic document that forces the things to be considered in one planning document. So I think that will, improve that over time. Yeah.
Councillor Lord.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I guess my question goes to, well, I was looking initially at the table on page 177, which is table 2, sufficiency for housing capacity, and I'm probably asking Andrew's question in a different way and not understanding the answer quite, but no one, well, I'm certainly not blaming 2GP for what was allowed, and we know that the growth of the city has increased, and you've now addressed it with variation 2, and I think that's a pretty good start. What is the reason that we can't just open up more areas, the same old problem of infrastructure, not having adequate infrastructure in adequate places and controlling the growth? Is that why we limit that?
Well, I suppose there's a range of reasons why you might control how much greenfield land that you open up. And that's certainly the ability for infrastructure to be delivered, not just by the DCC, but by the sector as well, and is certainly one really critical factor. But there could be other reasons around wanting to not lose productive rural land unless it's necessary for growth. And ultimately, growth needs to be catered for through a combination of using the land that's already serviced and already urban more efficiently, and some greenfield land. So it's a delicate balance, but so you just couldn't just open up the rest of the Tari, because it would not be able to be serviced, as well as what we hear from the community is they don't want to lose good, highly productive land unless it is really essential to cater for that population, and after we've also looked at some other options, including intensification.
Yeah, I probably think opening up the rest of the Tari is a stretch to what I'm trying to ask, and because I understand that too.
Yeah.
But I'm thinking, if we wanted to make a difference to housing prices, for example, one of the big, I think there was a section sold in Mosgiel recently for nearly 600k or something. It was a ridiculous figure. It used to be, as recently as sort of 5 or 6 years ago, you could buy sections for under, around the 100, and now they've trebled in price. And so I'm wondering if it is too difficult, and this probably how I'm trying to phrase the question, is it too difficult? So instead of on that table in 2023, if we had a deficiency of 180, if we had plus 500 there, is it impossible? Is it ridiculously difficult to do another variation now that can enable us to be 500 ahead of the game or 1,000 ahead of the game, therefore meaning that there's a lot more options and the price of sections could fall, because I totally recognise what Nathan said in his report, that just because someone has a section that's big enough to bowl down a house and put 5 on doesn't mean that people want to do that, and I totally appreciate that. And if I had the right section, I might feel the same way. But
yeah, just to clarify, the figures that Nathan uses are a bit more. They already incorporate a 20% at least to ensure that the market is competitive. I guess just one thing to remember is that the figures for Dunedin are relatively small. They're really relatively small figures for houses, and we have a number of areas that may come on stream as we resolve some appeals, and we could quickly find ourselves with double or triple the number that we need coming on stream in a very short time. I think we're right now at a bit of a bottleneck in terms of getting that capacity on stream, but I think when it comes, it will come relatively quickly, and hopefully there will be some market correction to recognize that there's a lot more competition. But I just think right now we've gone through that greenfield land that we've had and some of the other opportunities in the city very quickly through this little burst of activity, but I think things will turn around relatively quick and not too far into the future.
Geraldo.
Thank you, Chair. When you talked about a bottleneck, and I note that you're looking at the hospital rebuild, how do you feel that bottleneck will affect the supply for the upcoming rebuild, and how are we addressing that?
Well, I think that the hospital worker figures, I would let Nathan answer if you're particularly interested in what the current estimates are around, if that's your main concern. Yep.
Yeah, so it's obviously going to be quite a large number of construction workers on that, you know, in the space of like 1,000 or so at any one point in time. That could create additional pressure on the housing market, but there's a lot of uncertainty about whether those construction workers, how many of those are current Dunedin residents, how many people are being trained up, how many people are coming from out of town. So it's really hard to tell what the scale of the impact is going to be.
Cool. And just we've got 2.3 related work, and I note an assessment of climate change adaptation options, particularly for South Dunedin, and the importance of the work around South Dunedin. So can you comment on that a wee bit? And Mosgiel, I think, too, has the same, similar.
Potentially a wee bit, but it's I guess the point in the report is that it's too early to tell what those options around South Dunedin and potentially Mosgiel would look like, and what happens to the land in those areas, about whether we need to offset that with making more land available elsewhere or not. Depends on the outcomes of that work, and it's very early days, from what I understand.
Councillor Houlihan.
Thank you. So it's clear to say that, is it fair to say maybe about 1,000 we're estimating for the hospital build, you know, give or take, possibly, and coming into our city, or we're not sure, could be here. Have we estimated the growth of the university? Because I believe we've had a provisional figures for 2021 show an increase of 5.4% or 952 equivalent full-time students. Is that something, because obviously if they all want a house, say they go flatting, some of them, we could be looking at 250, you know, more houses needed for that. Is that something we've taken into account at all?
It's kind of built into the projections, but we are also talking to the university. They've also put out in the discussion document an aspirational target of growing from approximately 20,000 to 25,000 students by 2040. Whether that carries through to their final policy or not remains to be seen, but we are having discussions with them about what they expect to happen.
Yes, so that with the possible 1,000 for the hospital rebuild, and then we've got also, would you say it's fair to say that COVID, you know, with a lot of people coming home, that could create more people coming back to Dunedin? Has that been calculated at all?
Yeah, it's hard to say what's going to happen when the borders open up a bit more. To this point, people have returned home, but that's been dwarfed by the amount of migration that we haven't seen. We don't have figures for Dunedin, but across New Zealand, pre-COVID, we were seeing, net migration of 60, 70, 80,000 people a year. At the moment, the amount of people moving to New Zealand is, it's like 5 or 10,000. Don't quote me on that, but it's much lower in comparison. So even if all those people were coming to New Zealand to stay, it doesn't make up for the migration that we haven't been seeing.
No, I think around 6,500 migrants were coming into New Zealand provisionally, which say if 2.6 of those come to Dunedin, that's 169 people. Would we, so those added up, are we looking at a serious crisis for housing? I suppose that's what I'm trying to find out, because with those figures, it says here in number 5 on this report, the analysis shows that while Dunedin has insufficient development, and I'm just wondering what this exactly means, Dunedin has insufficient development capacity based on operative second generation district plan 2GP rules and zoning. What is that saying there?
Sorry, I can answer. So the operative provisions don't count any additional capacity that is still to be resolved through appeals. So so there's the extra capacity that may come in through appeals, which is we're hoping to work through within the next 12 months and as soon within that next 12 months as we can. And then there's also variation to changes. So basically, operative is under the current rules what you're allowed to do, does not count any changes that may get settled once we settle the remaining appeals, nor does it count any of the changes that are proposed through variation too.
All right, Councillor Raddick.
Oh, I had another question.
Not at the moment you don't. Councillor Raddick.
Thank you. I was curious, page 8 of your papers, 184 or 2 on hours, there's a variation in the numbers. However, one of the underlying strategic directions of the 2GP is there a range of housing choices in Dunedin that provides for community needs and supports social well-being. How has that played out? How have we gone on that objective?
Of housing choices?
Yeah, well, community needs and social well-being.
I'm not sure how to, I think you need to maybe ask me something more specific. I'm not quite sure what the question that you're asking is.
I suppose, how well did the 2GP succeed given that house prices have doubled in Dunedin over the period?
Well, I guess I would just note that what a plan does is create an opportunity for somebody to do a development. It doesn't do the development. And so, and as Nathan outlined at the start, all we can do is create the opportunity for people to build houses and to try to make that opportunity as easy as possible. And that's what I think we have been successful at, adding significant capacity. And I think while it is always a work in progress, we have made significant inroads through the plan and through other activities of council. But it's important to realize that Dunedin has had a long history of very small numbers of houses being built, and to change that sector, to significantly increase the number of houses that it's capable of building, having the builders, the plumbers, the electricians, all the other tradies, the infrastructure, roading people, everyone else, takes time to build up that sector. And anecdotally, what I'm hearing is that sector is just not keeping up. So there's opportunities there, but there's just not enough people to deliver them. And so, we can do our bit, and we are doing our bit, but we also need to look beyond that at all the other things that might be constraining houses getting built.
Right,
Thank you. Mayor Hawkins. I am concerned that we're having multiple questions, that people are not being reasonable to their colleagues, and so one or two is fine, and we'll keep going until the questions run out. But you've had a couple. Mayor Hawkins.
Just one.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know that the focus has obviously been on residential development here, but one of the other issues we get a lot from the local business community is concern around the availability or the quantum of industrial land that we have. And I'm not quite sure, is that work not being done? Is that a subsequent piece of work to this?
Yeah, so the National Policy Statement on Urban Development required us to do housing by the 31st of July, but business land we had additional time for, so that will be the next piece of work.
And when you're looking at modelling constraints, particularly around industrial land in the Dunedin context, will the availability of freehold land be a limiting factor in your assessment?
So usually it's done through a multi-criteria analysis, so you score land based on various different components, and one of those usually is freehold versus other title.
And what is the timeline, do you think, on that piece of work? Like a year, 3 years?
I think, so the deadline is in time to inform the future development strategy and to inform the 2024 LTP, but hopefully, within the next year or two, I'd say.
Great, thank you.
Councillor Lofiso.
Tēnā koe, Mr. Chair. Tēnā korua. Thank you very much for all the mahi and your patience in answering our questions. I'm referring to 6.3 housing for Māori, and I was just wondering, please, are there no? I know that you've got 2016 and 2006 sources in terms of the housing needs of Māori. Are there no more recent than 2016 sources, and no specific city-specific research done on that?
Not that I'm aware of, and we did talk to the Ministry of the Environment to inquire about whether they could point us in the direction of anything, and they hadn't. When we work on the future development strategy, we will be engaging with Kaitahu directly on their aspirations and on their views more, so we hopefully can get to it.
Yes, I saw that mana whenua will be involved. I wasn't here when the last spatial plan was developed, and so I was just seeking some information on the engagement with Okahas. Like, is that a contract, and at what stage? And maybe this is not a question for you. I don't know. At what stage do we actually have a conversation with mana whenua as to the differing views, world views? Because as far as my understanding goes, commodification of the whenua is not a done thing. So as well as looking at these issues to meet some very real needs, where do we have those conversations about the clashing worldviews?
Well, I can answer that to say at every stage. So through every planning process, there is a requirement to engage with mana whenua. Sometimes that engagement is done as requesting a specific piece of work or co-authoring parts of the document. That's what was done for the 2GP. So there were certain bits that were co-authored, and sometimes it is a dialogue, but it really varies, but it does need to occur at every stage.
Further questions? Councillor Houlihan.
Thank you. Yes, I just did a quick add up of those figures. And do you think that it's possible in the next 3 years we could be looking at just over 4,000 houses needed? Is that a possibility? With the quick, I mean, it was only a quick calculation I did of like the people coming in for the hospital build, the increase in students, possible increase of people coming home from the COVID, situation, and the other pressures on our city that we've got at the moment. Do you see that being a possibility?
So projecting the future is always, fraught. What we've done is we've taken the scenario that's we feel to be the most likely scenario of what will happen, and that's based on Statistics New Zealand's view on what's most likely going to happen, incorporating COVID and various different impacts and different things. But there's always the opportunity for it to be higher or lower than we think, and that's why it's important that we do scenario testing in our work and keep thinking about what if it is higher or what if it is lower. It's hard to say what will happen, but this is what we think is most likely to happen at this stage.
Yes. So what can we do, you know, like we've talked obviously back and forth quite a bit today, but in reality, have we got areas, have we got resources and areas available to meet that demand in our city at the moment?
Well, I'd point out that our consented dwellings, based on building consents, is the highest since 2002.
Yes.
And I think, as you heard earlier, we had subdivision consents for over 750 houses or apartments in 1 month alone. So there's a lot of capacity out there. Construction is slower than that, but there is capacity out there to meet demand over the short term and likely the medium term, I believe.
Thank you. Councillor Raddick.
So you think that even
Councillor
if we
Raddick.
I was still on my questions.
I'm sorry, you had quite a concise answer to your question. I'll come back to you, but we're not going to have the sort of feast of questions that's never ending. Councillor Raddick.
Okay, thank you. So a reasonably straightforward question, I hope. There's the table on page 179, which will be number 3 on your pages, sufficiency of housing capacity. With including variation 2, but we're obviously meeting demand or immediate demand quite well. But of course, under the national policy statement, we're required to meet demand all the way out. So I presume that, being the planners that you are, you'll have a plan for variation 3 to increase capacity even beyond that supplied by variation 2. What does that look like? Variation 3, I mean.
Well, variation 3 won't be focused on housing capacity. It will address some other matters as it happens. But the next step in terms of capacity is the future development strategy. So, excuse me, at this point, we feel confident that through variation 2, we've addressed the immediate needs to give us the time to do the strategic planning process. And that's really critical because we need to ensure that we have infrastructure to service this housing. And the only way to, and at the moment, we can't rezone areas until we add more infrastructure into the LTP the next time around. So we've shored ourselves up, I believe, through variation 2 and this last LTP to see us through to the next LTP. And that's when, once we have that strategy in place, we would instigate a plan change to deliver it once it has been agreed. Yeah.
Further questions? Councillor Elder.
Just a query, and you may not be able to answer this. I know that the government has indicated that to assist with development, they've got an urban infrastructure fund for growth, and I was just wondering if that was something that the Dunedin City Council is looking at in the future or in the near future. This is.
I believe that's a question for Mr. True.
Sorry, I know Lisa Carrington and them are in finals. So just about the government fund for urban development and infrastructure and the support package available for that. And I was just wondering, is one, Dunedin eligible for that? And two, are we looking at applying for it in some form or capacity?
Yes, we considered an application, and we met the eligibility criteria, but we thought it would be very difficult to score highly in the evaluation criteria, and I guess where we landed was we thought that our resources were better used kind of developing and designing and planning for the infrastructure rather than diverting it to do an application that may or may not be successful.
Thank you. Councillor Wiley.
Thank you. Nathan, I'm just looking at the migration numbers and looking at the growth in Dunedin. And I look at because you've just talked about how the Stats New Zealand is where your numbers have come from. So Stats New Zealand are indicating, based on this, essentially a 0.05% growth around the time of 2048.
That sounds about right.
Sounds about right. So from 2028 to 2048, so over that 20-year period, Stats New Zealand believe that only 215 people per annum are going to migrate to Dunedin.
Yeah, so that's based on the historic long-term migration rates. So if you look at the last kind of 30 or 40 years, that's the amount of migration that they're projecting in the future. And of course, that's a wee bit sketchy, which is why projecting into the long term is always difficult and could change.
Okay, but I guess with this paper, we're trying to get an indication of how we grow the city. And I sort of get lost a little bit in this paper based on everything else, the stories we're telling. Like we talked about playground spaces earlier in a previous meeting, and about how we're making the city such a strong family city and what a great place for kids to grow up. And then I look in it and I see there's really no change for from 2018 to 2038 for one parent with child and couples with children. And I'm like, oh, actually, what are we doing wrong as a city? Should we not be investing in the playgrounds, or where are we?
Yeah, it's a fair question. So the projections are just that. They're projections based on kind of long-term trends. They're not goals. They're not what will happen. We should definitely be thinking about doing things to make the projections wrong and doing things which may mean that we get higher growth, and then both preparing for that and enabling that. So I don't think we should be saying this is how many houses we need. We don't want to enable any more or any less, or that they will come about, because we can do things to change what actually happens.
So if I go back to refugee numbers from 2016 to 2019, we had 550 former refugees moved to Dunedin. Again, got that number from an ODT article. It could have been more. And I'm like going, I don't even see any reference to refugee numbers. And I'm like going, okay, well, all of a sudden I'm seeing all this information and going, are we not going to bring any more refugees into our city? You know, and we talked here about the projections of the university, and then we got ACC wanting to build a building, and I'm looking at all these things are adding up. But yet, I'm not seeing it here in the paper. But I'm heartened when, you know, we 750 residential consents, or, you know, in the last month.
Yeah, so a lot of people disagree at times with Stats NZ projections, particularly for their own areas. They are top-down, so they look at what's probably going to happen with New Zealand and then feed that down into cities and then down into smaller areas. There is a piece of work that we're looking at doing as a council to get new projections, but from consultants who would look from a bottom-up. So they'll look at Dunedin and what's happening, particularly in terms of the economy and future plans over the long term, and build projections from the bottom up rather than the stats top-down approach. So there is the ability to do that work.
Parker.
Thank you, Chair. I see that there was a 2019 housing capacity assessment done, and now we're in 2021. How often are these housing capacity assessments required to be done?
They're required every 3 years, but there was a change in legislation, well, change from the NPS, National Policy Statement on Urban Development Capacity, to a new National Policy Statement, which is why it's 2 years this time.
Councillor Raddick.
I'm curious about a couple of things in terms of constraints of development. So one of the things is in transport, page 13 on yours. You assume some transport mode shift associated with growth occurs, so the mode shift is required to mitigate traffic congestion. Do you have a figure on that? How much mode shift is required?
No, that write-up was taken from the transport teams. They'd have to advise you on that one.
Just a general. Yep, thank you. So similarly, in terms of the flooding of South Dunedin, I'd refer to the Three Waters team for that.
Correct.
Thank you.
I would like to make some progress, so this is the last question. Councillor Houlihan.
Thank you. So has the 2GP done the job that it was intended to do to plan for growth for our city?
Well, the district plan is not a static document, I guess would be the first point I'd make. We are required to be responsive. And so just emphasizing again what Nathan has highlighted, which is forecasting growth is a difficult art, if not a science. Yeah. And so we will constantly monitor this. And at the moment, I think with what we have done through Variation 2, I am confident that we will be on the front foot once we get ourselves through this little unexpected bottleneck caused by very unexpected growth rates. Right. But we will keep our eye on the target, and we will adjust the 2GP as we are required, as we understand that growth rate may change. So I think we're in a good place, but there is work to be done. We're not going to just sit and say the 2GP is done, we're done with planning. I don't think that's where we're at.
Would you say we're currently in a crisis, or is that too strong, strong a word?
I believe there are real issues for people, and that's you cannot deny that. I think there are a range of factors that are causing that. And I think planning is one part of the solution, but not the only part of that solution. So yes, there's something to be done.
Thank
So
you.
is that a yes to crisis?
Councillor Wiley seems to want to have the final question, so I'll extend that one more last question to him.
Thank you. Nathan, when I look at the last page here on 6.5 housing market analysts, it starts off, there are significant affordability issues in Dunedin with half of renting households living in unaffordable housing and 30% living in severely unaffordable housing. I then go through, and the last paragraph, it says, to address the uncertainty of the link between planning and housing affordability, a conservative approach is being taken by considering the possible impacts of planning, and it goes on. How do we actually make Dunedin affordable? And how do we, it's clearly articulated, your last sentence is, it's a conservative approach.
Easy question. Yeah. I guess it goes
and
to
after this you can ensure world peace as well. Good luck.
Yeah.
Will do. I guess it goes to my point earlier that all we can do is the stuff that we're doing in planning and making sure that planning isn't the constraint to housing affordability.
All right. I think most people would agree that we've had an extensive session of questions of staff. I'm now moving that we note, this is highly contentious, that we note the conclusions of the housing capacity assessment for the city dated July 21, and that work is underway to add additional housing capacity. I have a seconder, please. Seconded by the Mayor. Would anyone like to speak to that noting motion? Councillor Geary.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I wanted to highlight one issue in this regard. First of all, though, to thank staff for the enormous amount of work and Mr. Stocker for this report. Very valuable to see the changes in the 2 years since the last one. But I wanted to highlight the issue that has been raised with me multiple times from those working at the front line, working on the ground in the building industry, those who are building new homes for people in our community. And what they tell me is that business is booming. A year ago, they were either contemplating laying off staff or they were laying off staff, and now business is booming for them. The problem that is stopping them from building at the rate that they would like to be able to, and the rate that the work is coming in, is the inability to get staff that are skilled in the areas and the right staff is what they say. And this is everything from cadastral surveyors, engineers, plumbers, concrete cutters, bricklayers, electricians and builders. And that is a huge issue. And the issue of immigration and the closure of the borders is obviously having an effect too. But getting the right staff, I'm being told, is a massive issue for our construction industry.
Councillor Houlihan.
Thank you. Yes, I know, thank you, Chair. I know the Chair is keen to move on. However, I would say that spending time on this, I feel, is worthy. It is a major issue in our city. And as the Chair mentioned, it is a serious issue, and it is. You know, Dr. Johnson could not say, no, it is not a crisis. And I do believe we are looking at a crisis right now. When you look at the figures, we have impacts on our city which is a great thing to have growth, because look, Dunedin has been in a period where we haven't had growth for many years. So that's possibly one of the reasons why when the 2GP was done, they didn't plan for such growth. But given all the things that we now have with the new building of the hospital, bringing in a lot of workers there, which we hope, as Councillor Gary has raised, the issue around getting resources and staff, hopefully we can get staff to do those important builds. But there's pressure on our resources, there's pressure on our land, and there's pressure on our infrastructure. And I would love to say right now we can fix all those and move forward, but I think it's going to take time, and it's going to take a lot of time. So people need to, you know, for those people who are struggling to find a property or paying huge exorbitant prices, I mean, I don't think that's going to change in the near future. And it's awful to say, but there's no quick fix here. And I like to be positive, but I don't see a silver lining right now. However, hopefully, well, there is a silver lining in the way that we've got a lot of people in our city, so it makes the city more vibrant, and there is an economic benefit to that. However, if the people can't get a home, they're likely to leave. So it is something we need to look at urgently, and I think we need to call an urgent housing summit or something to say, right, what can we do? Because we are at a crisis. We've got people coming into our city from everywhere, students increasing, houses, you know, the people coming in to build the hospital. We've got people coming back from overseas because of COVID. There's numerous pressures on our city. We need to sit down now urgently and say, as a council, who can help us? What can we do?
Councillor Wiley.
Thank you. I want to thank staff for this paper. It does highlight a lot of issues facing us, not just in the next 3 years, but in the next 20, 30 years plus. It's actually quite sombre reading when you think about, you know, my son and daughter in their early 20s, how are they going to afford a house in Dunedin in 2030? And how is many other young people going to afford a house in 2030? We have a great city, and we've got to remember that. We have a very, very great city. We have great facilities, education, hospital, the environment, and it's a great place to live, work, play. When we look at how Enterprise Dunedin goes out and sells our city, it talks about all the wonderful aspects we have here. But I'm sorry, this paper is telling me we really have no future for a while. And that's very difficult for me to take. We have supply and demand. We have house prices going through the roof that have been unimaginable. It clearly says it's a conservative approach. I'm sorry, but you talk to any developer and they could tell you there's a lot of land available to be developed around this city. And they want to develop. And it's not on the Taieri, it's not valuable soils. We have the ability to develop a lot more. And unfortunately, this conservative approach is not going to tick the boxes. It's great for those of us around the table that own property, because we are going to get a lot of great capital gain out of it. But that's what really disappoints me. It creates lack of opportunity for a lot of other people to come and live, work and play in our city. When I see the numbers and some of the graphs and the stats, I struggle how Stats New Zealand and whoever else have supplied the numbers are telling us we're going to have a 215 people per annum between 2028 and 2048 coming to our city. I struggle when I see there's going to be no increase in families or residents with one or more children in it. This is a great city to raise a family. And we have to remember that, and we have to present that. Yes, I acknowledge the construction industry is at capacity, but if you give them a pathway where they know they can invest and develop more houses, they will. It's no different than Three Waters. If we put the work in front of them and we say, here's your opportunity, they will pick up and run with it. I will note with this report, because as the chair has made out, it is about noting the report. And there's a lot of good information in it. But I am very, very frustrated and disappointed in some of what I've read. But I appreciate the work that's gone into it. And I just hope we can readdress this in the next 3 to 4 years, because I fear what's going to happen with our housing stock. When it says straight up, Housing Market Analyst Summary, there are significant affordability issues in Dunedin, with half of renting households living in unaffordable housing and 30% living in severely unaffordable housing. We need to fix that.
Further speakers? Mayor Hawkins.
Yeah, thank you. I want to respond firstly to a comment that Councillor Houlihan made, and I don't think it's appropriate to ask leading political questions of staff, and then when they wisely choose not to answer leading political questions, to try and spin that as staff deny that we have an issue. I don't think that's fair to make that kind of analysis of the opportunity that we have had extensively to ask questions of staff. I wonder, listening to some of the questions and speeches prior, whether we're reading the same reports. This is a report around housing capacity, and we've seen the assessments done here that tell us that there will be sufficiency of housing capacity to meet our obligations under the NPS through until 2030, and just shy of what is required through until 2050. And that work is ongoing through variations and otherwise, and appeals and those sorts of processes that we have invested extensively in. It is a task that we are set by the Ministry for the Environment. We have done it, and this is what it tells us between now and 2030. Now, I know there is a desire in some quarters to try and conflate capacity and affordability. And that, the land supply libertarians will argue that if we just free up all the land and let people build whatever they like, wherever they like, then everything will miraculously become cheaper overnight to purchase, which is a fantasy. Obviously, supply has something to do with it, but I don't know what the second generation district plan could have done to influence record low interest rates, which allow people to borrow more and therefore pay more for houses, and are a considerable factor in terms of what the cost of purchasing a house is. I don't know what the second generation district plan could have done for the fact, from a macroeconomic point of view, that it's easier to buy a second house than it is to buy a first one. In fact, it's actively encouraged by the settings that we have, and what benefit is that? But that is not the task that staff have been set in this instance. The task has been to assess the capacity required and the supply that we are providing in the short, medium and long term. And I share the reservations around some of the forecasting. That hasn't particularly worked out in our favour necessarily either, but those are the forecasts that we have, and that is the methodology that we have. And to try and undermine the report that is a product of that work, I think is disappointing. And I Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have little further to add other than I hope we are able, and it's mostly disappointing actually that we have elected members that this city has invested in heavily to train as Certified Resource Management Act commissioners who still seem to struggle with what is a fundamental part of RMA work. But I've got nothing more to add other than that I would hope for in future we would tackling complex problems such as this, that we can do it with a little more nuance than we've managed to so far.
I have only a couple of comments to make, because I think the key one has just been made by the Mayor, and that is that this report tells us that we are very close to, over the long term and in the shorter term, have already identified what we are required to have in terms of land supply for urban development. And I think we should be pleased about that. I don't think there's anything to be achieved by the predictions of catastrophe that we've heard around the table. And as has been stated, freeing up land doesn't mean it's going to be cheaper. We are not the developers, and we know the nonsense of freeing up or zoning land that is neither appropriate nor serviceable, and that has led us to the variations and all the work that this authority has done for the last few years, which have led us to the position where we are able to meet much more recent government demands in terms of housing capacity. I think that is the long and the short of the debate here, and people need to focus not on some other agenda that appears to be apparent around the table, but on the reality of what is in the document that has been presented to us. I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against, no. Are there any abstentions? That is agreed unanimously. Thank you. I will now move that, pursuant to the provisions of the Local Government Official Information and Meetings Act, we exclude the public from the meeting for the reasons outlined on the agenda, and will adjourn for 5 minutes to allow the members of the media to leave. Seconded by Councillor Walker. Those in favour, please say aye. Against, no. That's agreed.